The year is 2047. In the sky above the city, a portal with tentacles hangs, from which green energy emanates. It's been 25 years since portals called the Gates of Hell started opening all over the world. The world has changed, and humanity is extinct. Many huge monsters roam the city ruins. Only one person survived. In front of them stands the silhouette of a man in a raincoat. He is clad in a skull-shaped steel armor with a hood covering his face. In his hand is the head of a monster. You can't see anything under the hood. A man walks across a ruined stone floor. His little finger is missing. His hair is gray and he's wearing a worn brown coat. He looked seriously ahead. His face is lined and scarred and he has a gray mustache and beard. Lightning flashed and he was standing in front of the armored man. The armored man swung his sword and drove it into the ground. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head and holding out the monster's head. An elderly man stands straight in front of him. He looked at it calmly. Broken bar sign. The man took a bottle of wine in his hand. He started drinking from the bottle and the voice said that he remembered that there were rumors about a man who only hunts high-eye demons. He asked who would have thought they would be true and what it meant. The man wiped his mouth with his hand and said it was too long to talk about. He said he'd find out soon enough. The armored man opened the doors. The severed head's eyes lit up, asking if that task was real. The man replied that it was real. Lots of angry monster heads are hanging on the wall. A man in armor approached the shelves of monster heads. The man said that after the extinction of humanity, whoever collected more than 666,666 top-class demon heads would be able to shake the timeline and turn back time. The monster's head looked at him intently. The man said he was the last one. He put his head on the shelf and the head started cursing, asking if he was crazy. The head asked him if he thought he could do something about it and change the future by going back in time. The man calmly replied that he would see his daughter. The head exclaimed in surprise that he was doing all this just for the sake of it. The man stabbed the monster's head between the eyes with a dagger. He said with a grim face that this was the only reason he had endured this hell for 25 years. Under his hand, purple energy lit up. The monster had told him not to expect them to sit idly by. The man asked if he was talking about phases. Purple energy glowed from the monster's forehead. The man frowned and said that they were the ones who opened the portal, turned this world into a hell, and came up with this stupid task. The dialogue box says, "Legendary quest. You have met all the conditions for regression." The man was shrouded in purple energy. He said that even they don't know everything. The monsters' heads opened their mouths wide, bright purple light coming out of their eye sockets and mouths. The man stood with his hands clenched into fists. The dialogue box reported that it collected 666,666 heads required for regression. The monster's head was covered in cracks, glowing with a purple light. The man said he didn't care about the phases. The dialogue box says, "You are the only survivor on Earth." The spiral of pink energy glowed brightly. The man gritted his teeth and said that he would kill anyone who stood in his way. The dialogue boxes say, "Task completed. Activating the Nexus." A pillar of bright energy shot out of the sky and into the building. A pillar of blue energy radiated from the ruined building. A pillar of yellow energy hit the building. A guy with dark hair and blue eyes is sitting up in bed. He looked down at his hands. Then he raised his head and looked out the window. Frowning, he ran for the door. He looked out of the door and called out to Salmon. The guy was standing in front of a little girl who was sleeping in bed, covered with a baby blanket. Dragons fly over the burning ruined city. The main character holds the hand of his daughter, who is hanging over the city street. She called out to him with tears in her eyes. The main character thought that his right arm was broken, and it was hard for him to move his left. His left arm is covered in blood, and 2 arrows are sticking out of it. He prayed to God in his mind, thinking that he didn't care if he died, and asking that at least his daughter be saved. The main character gritted his teeth. The monster's huge mouth appeared under his daughter's feet. She looked down. The main character screamed. The girl called out from the monster's mouth, holding out her other hand. The monster's jaws closed, leaving the girl's hand holding onto the protagonist's arm. The main character pressed his daughter's hand to his face, clasping her palm with both hands. Shaking, he began to cry. Salmon slowly opened her eyes. The main character quickly left her room, closing the door. The girl sat up in bed and called out to him in surprise. The main character was standing outside the door, pressing his back against it. He fell to his knees. He began to cry, thanking God. Frowning, he opened his eyes and looked ahead. He thought that he knew that this happiness wouldn't last long. He remembered the green gate opening in the overcast sky above the city. The main character thought that on the day when the gates of hell open, the world will change beyond recognition. He stares into the open refrigerator. The main character drank water from a bottle. He reflected that for the past 25 years, he had lived only for himself. He tossed the empty bottle into the sink. The main character asked if such a person could survive this hell while protecting Salmon. Pursing his lips, he said that he shouldn't think about the odds. He glanced at the door to Salmon's room. She was sleeping soundly in bed. The main character thought that he had to protect her. He stood erect, looking steadily ahead. Frowning, he said that he would protect her even if it cost him his life. The dialogue boxes say, "Status, you have received magic power. You have received entry-level spiritual magic. First level spirit eyes activated." The main character looked in surprise at his hand, which was glowing blue. Raising an eyebrow, he noticed that his strength was still there. The dialogue box says, "You have received entry-level spiritual magic." He opened his eyes wide. The dialogue box says that the spirit is looking at it. The main character looked at the shelf. There was a picture of a happy woman holding a baby. He asked if it was Sua. A light blue image of a woman hugged the main character from behind. He thought about how he didn't know why he still had his powers. He put on his coat. The main character suggested that this was due to a shift in the timeline, or it was an ability of the regressor. The main character is standing, dressed in a long coat. In 3 days, on October 11th, the gates of hell will open. Above the ground, where there is a crowd of monsters, a huge red eye is visible in the sky. 3 days before the gate opens, there are already people who know of its existence. The 8 prophets chosen by the 8 phases are 8 martial stars, the chosen saviors of humanity who progressed incredibly fast. The main character thought that, given what he remembers from the last 25 years of his life, he would be able to intercept a lot of achievements and rewards that were available only to them. Night City Street. The main character is standing in front of the descent underground. Looking at the stairs leading down, he said that he would take everything for himself. He went down into the underground passage. The main character walks along it, looking around. Turning to the side, he noticed a sign, "Fortune Teller, Compatibility of Names." He walked in, slowly opening the door. He was looking ahead with a serious face. Someone in the dark said it was strange because no one was supposed to come today. He asked with a smile how anyone could have come. The main character replied that it sounded like he wasn't expecting a visitor. An elderly man in shorts sitting on a chair asked what brought him here. The main character replied that he had come to buy something and called him Yaksha. A huge hand grabbed him and slammed him into the wall. The main character looked ahead, gritting his teeth. The owner of the hand was not visible in the cloud of dust. The main character frowned. The man in boots came up to him. In the darkness, the silhouette of a horned man could be seen holding the main character above the ground. Yaksha furiously asked who he was. The main character replied that he wanted to pass the prophet's test and that he knew what they were doing here. He asked if he was right. Yaksha asked who could have told him about this place. Narrowing his eyes, he said that it was impossible, because they said from above that the selection process was still going on. The main character calmly replied that it was true, and that was why he was here. He said that he wanted to get the chosen one's place, so he came in advance. Yaksha chuckled. His laughter echoed down the hall. He asked with a smirk if he was the regressor who killed 666,666 top-class demons that everyone is burning up about. He asked if he thought they wouldn't find out. Yaksha said that they know everything, and they know that he has shaken the timeline. Holding up his index finger, he said that he was in serious trouble. He asked with a smirk if he had decided that, thanks to regression, he would be able to do whatever he wanted. Narrowing his eyes viciously, Yaksha said that this place was a chessboard created by the higher phases, and if he mixed up the cards with them, he would only make them angry. The main character told him to remove his hand because it stinks. 3 swords slammed into Yaksha's arm. He let go of the main character, raising his hand and shouting in pain. Dusting off his clothes, the main character said that he wanted to cut off his arm, but it seems that his body is not ready for this yet. He added that it makes sense because he doesn't have any special runes yet. Yaksha cursed as he looked at the sword sticking out of his hand. The main character told him that he was wrong because it was the phases that made regression possible, and this is part of their plan. He asked if he thought such creatures cared about them. Yaksha waved his hand and shouted at him to be quiet. A thud sounded. Yaksha stands in surprise with the mark of a blow on his cheek. Another blow landed on his other cheek. The main character seriously asked if he only needed the head for decoration. He asked if he understood what it meant to be a regressor. Yaksha, trembling, kneels in front of the main character. The main character told him that this means that he has fulfilled the condition. He lowered his hand, and Yaksha flinched when he saw it. The main character said that 666,666 top-class demons had fallen by his hand. Yaksha thought that the Yaksha race feeds on the fears of other creatures, but now he is afraid. His eyes widened in alarm. He became very small and, waving his arms, shouted that he was weak. The main character grinned contentedly. Showing Yaksha 2 fingers, he said that he had to tell him 2 things. He told him that the first one was that before the Hell Gate opened, members of his race would not be able to kill humans, and that would be the rule. He went on and said that the second one was that the reason he was looking for it was because of a certain bundle that Yaksha was in possession of. Yaksha was startled and asked about the bundle. The main character told him not to even think about trying to kill him when the Hell Gate opened. He called it Yaksha of the second rank cure. The curate asked him, startled, how he knew his real name. Grinning, the main character said that they are very close to him. Cure opened his mouth in surprise and fright. He thought it couldn't be. He asked in displeasure if he meant to say that he was his servant or something. The main character frowned. Cure gave him a startled look and gave up. Above Cure, who was standing with his arms outstretched, was a sack tied with red rope. The knot came undone, and the rope came off the bag, opening it. The main character calmly looked to the side. He glanced at the dialogue box in front of him. He thought about it and decided that this was the right thing to do. He thought it was a shop reserved for prophets. The dialogue box said, number 4608, strong steel shield. Rank, magic, highest. Shield with high strength, created from an alloy of metals and ancient oak. Price, 300,000 heads. Number 230, the Sunstar Sword. Rank, rare, relic. The leader of the divine creatures attributed the ability to cut stars to this sword. The sword is able to increase its strength depending on the abilities of the owner. Has a sharp tongue. It never stops talking. Price, 1 million heads. Number 5147. The Emerald Staff. Rank, magic, highest. The emerald ball inside allows you to visualize your magic power. Price, 400,000 heads. The main character thought that they were crazy, and getting one head for each monster, he would never be able to buy anything. He decided that a little later, 1 million heads would be a small change for him. Cure asked him what he had been looking at for so long. He said he didn't even have any real ways to get the heads, and he wouldn't be able to buy anything. The main character pointed his finger at the dialogue box. Pointing a finger at himself, he told him to give it to him. They stared at each other in silence. Cure complained that he was crazy and asked how he could give him this. He asked if he could read. The dialogue box says, number 394,810. The Yaksha Scroll. Rank, magic, relic. The scroll is a relic of the Yaksha, one of the 8 major races, able to record and store countless things. With the power of Yaksha, you can change the recorded material. Items listed in the list still need to be redeemed. Price, 80,000 heads. Note, you can get a gift from Yaksha if you have a friendly relationship with him. Cure shouted about what it said about friendships. He shouted that he was hitting him with irons. He remembered the main character stabbing 3 swords into Cure's arm. He shouted that he was punching him in the face. He remembered how the main character had slapped Cure in the face. He furiously asked why on earth he should give him anything. Cure said he would get nothing from it. The main character grabbed the hilt of the sword with his hand. He started to pull the swords out of Cure's hand. He cried out in pain. He queried what he was doing. The main character calmly replied that he pulled them out for him. Yaksha asked which of the 2 was the demon. The main character threw him 2 bundles of money. Cure looked at the money and asked what it was. He replied that it was 20 million won, and he would give him another 80 million if he was his friend. Cure tossed the wads of money aside. The main character looked at the money thrown aside. Cure shouted that he knew perfectly well that these pieces of paper would lose their value in 3 days. The main character gave him a cold look and told him to trust him that they would be useful to him. He said that 2 years later, the money would save his life during a pitch-black night. Cure wondered what he was talking about. The main character told him to believe that he knows much better what will soon become valuable and what will not. He said that money will always have a price even when the gate opens. Cure glanced at the money, wondering if he was serious. He thought that in the human world, money is everything, but for them it is no more than paper. Cure irritably asked him if he was laughing at him. The main character said that he would have to take his word for it. Blood spurted out, and Cure screamed. Tossing the dagger in his hand, the protagonist said that he could not listen to him if he wanted to. He said all he knew was that in 2 years' time, Cure would be biting her elbows because of her refusal, but it would be too late. Gritting his teeth viciously, Cure said that he was very angry, even worse than Nagi. The main character grinned and said that he knew it. Cure was sweating nervously, frowning. The room spiraled. The main character is standing with a scroll in his hand. Cure asked what he was going to do with it. He replied that he would record the events. Cure was picking up bundles of money from the ground. The main character said that this will be his ticket to the trials of the prophets. Cure thought that he was good at talking nonsense. He told him he'd had enough, and he hoped he knew what he was doing. His eyes widened in surprise. The main character touched the open scroll with his index finger. The space in front of him shattered like glass. The main character said that it was time for him to meet the phases. He stepped through the shards. His eyes widened in surprise. Cure cried out. The main character looked ahead with a frown. A huge red eye stared down at him. The main character and Cure are walking on a bridge surrounded by black space and blue lights. Cure followed the main character with his eyes wide open. The main character turned around, and he looked away, pursing his lips. He looked at him nervously, and when he found that the main character was still looking at him, he was startled. He asked why he was following him. Cure told him to just go where he was going, and he would just witness how painful a death he would die. He asked if he could ask him a question. The main character asked what he wanted to know. Frowning, Kira said that he admits that this is true, and the reason he knows about the prophet test and the rune language is because of memories from his past life. He also allowed that right now he is trying to steal the prophet's privilege. The main character asked what was next. Kira asked him what he was going to do with the prophet, since he was the one who was supposed to come here in the first place. He asked if he knew who it was. He said that he was stealing his privilege right now and asked if he was ashamed. The main character frowned. The ghostly howl of Chwisu, a guy with dark hair and red eyes, wearing a high-collared black cloak and a bone necklace, was smiling unpleasantly. He is a peerless entity, one of the 8 martial stars. He stands in a ruined city surrounded by zombies and monsters wrapped in a red aura. Lord of hundreds of resurrected monsters. He's practically immortal. He was on par with the strongest of the 8 martial stars, Alec. Chwisu, wearing a medical mask and surgical clothing, puts white gloves on his hands. To people, he was just another piece of trash that needed to be disposed of because he was a psychopath. The guy with his mouth taped shut was lying on the table, chained up. Tears were streaming from his reddened eyes. In order to use resurrected monsters, he needed corpses as a basic requirement. Chwisu leaned over the man on the table. He experimented on living people to create good quality corpses. Chwisu turned around, pulling down his medical mask with a sinister grin. The main character said that he did the same thing with him. Frowning, Kira said that he didn't feel sorry for him at all. He said that no matter how strong he was in his previous life, right now he was just an ordinary person and he should be more careful. He said that if only he knew who he was disturbing right now. The main character thought that he already knows because he tortured him for 18 years. The voice said it was an unexpected visitor. The dialogue box says, "You have entered the domain of the Lord of the 7 Snakes." The main character looked up seriously. The Lord of the 7 Snakes asked Kira why he let people in here. He fumbled with his fingers. The Lord of the 7 Snakes said that only a prophet is allowed to enter here, and this is not the prophet he chose. The main character raised his head and said that not choosing him was his biggest mistake. He said that he should have chosen it from the beginning. A huge red eye appeared on the screen. Pointing his finger at the eye, Kira shouted that he was a regressor and an assassin who had killed 666,666 top-level demons. The Lord of the 7 Snakes said that he was the one who turned their game board upside down. He said he didn't deserve to be a prophet. The main character frowned and suggested that he check it out for himself. He said that he was definitely better than the Chwisu he had chosen. The huge eye began to close and the voice was silent. Before the eyes of the main character, a memory appeared in which he holds the hand of his daughter hanging over the city street. He thought about how his right arm was broken and he couldn't move his left arm. There are 2 arrows sticking out of his left hand. He thought that it didn't matter to him if he died, so he asked God to save his daughter. Under his daughter's feet, the mouth of a huge monster opened. The girl looked down. She called out to her father, reaching out her other hand from the monster's mouth. The main character shouted, and the monster's jaws closed, leaving only the girl's hand holding onto the main character's arm. This scene repeated itself several times in the protagonist's eyes, and he asked what it was. A blue hand touched their hands. The main character looked down worriedly. He shouted, "Sua." The main character closed his eyes. The Lord of the 7 Snakes chuckled and asked about the fact that the regressor who changed the timeline was his follower. The main character's eye is visible in the reflections on the broken glass. The glass shattered, and the main character stood behind it with a serious face. He got down on one knee and told him to think before he spoke. He leaped up with a dagger in his hand and stabbed the giant red eye. Kira's mouth dropped open in surprise. The main character frowned and said that he wasn't his follower. A white mist came out of the red eye. The main character landed on the ground, gritting his teeth. The Lord of the 7 Snakes said it was a surprise. The main character got to his feet. The Lord of the 7 Snakes asked what had happened to him to gain such power. The protagonist thought that just as he thought, even a supreme being doesn't know everything. He said that this force confirms his regression. He said that maybe it was a reward for surviving this hell. A hand with sharp black nails snapped its fingers. The main character and Kira were surrounded by a ring of purple flames. The main character looked ahead with a frown. The Lord of the 7 Snakes looked at him with sly eyes. He said he asked him where he got this power from. He sat on a high throne. The main character approached him and told him that Chwisu, the prophet of his choice, had given him this power himself. The Lord of the 7 Snakes replied that it was interesting. He said that he could not have imagined that the regressor would turn out to be his loyal servant. 3 huge white snakes stared at the main character. The Lord of the 7 Snakes smirked and said that he had the right to talk to him. Closing his eyes, he said that someone who killed 666,666 demons really did seem to be there. He said the person who did it was probably a sun and moon watcher. He added that he thought it was a useless achievement. He told him that he was deeply moved that he had overcome this obstacle and come to it on his own. The main character looked at him with a frown. The Lord of the Seven Serpents said that unfortunately, he has already chosen a prophet and his decisions are absolute. He was grinning as he sat on the throne, one leg crossed, surrounded by snakes. The main character said that this was not the case and asked him if he knew the requirements for regression. The smile faded from the Seven Serpent Lord's face and he asked what he was talking about. The main character said that this means that he is the only one who survived and the one he chose is not. He said that the prophets of every other supreme being died before him. The main character stands over the ruined ruins of the city. He said that he did not come to plead for the position of the prophet, but to give him a chance. He said that if he didn't choose it, then he didn't care and could just bring victory to the other higher beings. He added that the prophet he chooses will be the first one he kills. Kira anxiously asked him to calm down. Leaning on the arm of the throne, the Lord of the Seven Snakes asked if he was threatening him. He said with a threatening look that he could kill him here and now. He told him that he might become a common enemy of higher existences, which meant that his starting position would be worse. He asked why he should choose it. Nambyung replied that this way he could become the winner of this game. He said that he knew that higher beings couldn't consider him an enemy because of the established rules. Tyr looked at him worriedly. Nambyung said that even though he didn't know anything when the gates of hell first opened, he lived to see that moment. The Lord of the Seven Snakes stared at him in silence. The main character, pointing at himself with his thumb, said with a grin that he would survive this time. The Lord of the Seven Snakes moved slightly. He said he liked it. A pillar of light appeared next to Namgyung. He turned to him. Lying on the ground was Choi Hwisu, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, who was rubbing his neck, asking what had happened and where he was. The main character recognized him. Choi Hwisu raised his head at the sound of his name. There were noticeable bags under his eyes, and his face was unshaven. He asked who he was and why he knew his name. A huge red paw crushed it, spattering blood. The Lord of the Seven Serpents said that he would change the prophet. Red Paw returned to the pink portal. The Lord of the Seven Snakes said with a grin that he would choose him. The dialogue box says, "The Lord of the Seven Snakes has recognized you." A blue magic seal appeared under the protagonist's feet. The dialogue box says, "You have become a snake prophet. Prophet's privilege, teleport to the serpent vault." Namgyung grinned with satisfaction. Snake treasury. The Lord of the Seven Snakes and Namgyung are standing in front of 3 doors, 1 gold, 1 silver, and 1 bronze. Triad poison doors. The Lord of the Seven Snakes said with a grin that he could only open the bronze door, and told the protagonist to take whatever he wanted from it. He added that the prophets will have to lead the people when the carnival begins. Namgyung asked if the hell they were going through was a celebration for them. The Lord of the Seven Snakes corrected him with a grin and said that his name was Jor. Namgyung looked at him thoughtfully and thought that this was a start and he would use everything he could. The door opened in front of them. Kira stands behind me, shivering. He thought that his knees were shaking just from looking at it, and they were chatting as if it was nothing special. The doors closed behind him. He sat down on the floor. The doors swung open again. Kira was asleep, sitting on the floor. When he heard his name, he opened his eyes. Namgyung called for him to follow, and Kira agreed, getting to his feet. They came out of the portal in the underground hall. Kira asked what happened inside. The main character replied that he had received the item. Red-black energy was gathering in his hand. The dialogue box says, Number 8, Helmet of Monarch Lyric. Rank, Legendary. The helmet of the greatest, most arrogant king in history. You can gain great power, but you must pay for your presumptuous sins. When used by a living creature, it drains their life force. When used by the dead, they are granted great power. Pure, with a disappointed face, thought that he was wondering what equipment he had chosen, but this equipment is absolutely useless for a living person. He wondered why he had chosen it. He was startled to see Namgyung's eyes on him. Laughing nervously, he said that, as he expected, it had great taste. The main character told him to show his bag. Kira asked in surprise about the heads. Namgyung held a bag in his hands and said he had them. He added that he has 100,000 heads. Kira looked at him in surprise. He shouted in surprise, asking if he had received them from the Lord of the Seven Snakes. Namgyung said Jor gave them to him. Kira said that when they give something, they ask an incredible price in return, even for the simplest things. The main character replied that he already knew that. Kira asked in surprise what he had paid for 100,000 heads. He said he hadn't paid anything. He said with a grin that he probably got paid. He said that Jor was worried that he would become the target of other prophets by being a regressor, so he gave him 100,000 heads. He said that, instead, he gave him a quest, calling it his condition, something equivalent to the regression feat, kill 666,666 demons. On the dialogue box, next to the scroll wrapped in an orange aura, was written, Red Wax, a legendary rank quest. Namgyung opened the scroll. The dialogue box says, You have received a legendary rank quest. The protagonist narrowed his eyes at the scroll with a smirk. The dialogue box says, So the hidden quest 7 snake incarnations was added. Kira wondered what he had received. Namgung asked why he was standing like a pillar and said he told him to give him his bag. Catching himself, he nervously began to rummage in the bag and asked what to find for him. Namgung said to give him a sword that he can afford for the heads he has. He added that it should be at least a rare rank. Kira said that he found two, and two dialogue boxes appeared in front of the main character. The first one says, Widow's Eye. Rank, rare, best. The sword that a noble woman was given by her dead husband. The blade is poisoned. Price, 89,000 heads. Note, the cause of her husband's death is unknown. The second one says, Executioner's Beheading Blade. Rank, rare, best. Swung over 18 times at the pillory. The executioner's tenacity remains. Blood tainted with grudges. Price, 77,000 heads. Additional, if not wielded by a man of character, it may turn one into a homicidal maniac. Namgung said thoughtfully that the descriptions were too long and the deep stories didn't bode well. He said it only meant that there was a curse attached to them. Pure, digging in the bag, agreed and said that was why they were so cheap. Namgung said he was choosing this one. In his hand was a black sword with a red stripe in the middle. He said he would buy a bag for the remaining heads. Pure said he would give him the bag. The main character asked if he would give it to him for nothing. On the dialogue box in front of it was written, Dwarf's Work Belt. Grade, Magic, First. A belt made for short-legged dwarves to use when working. It can hold tools larger than itself. Cannot carry living creatures. Price, 400,000 heads. Pure, holding a belt with bags in his hands, said that, as he said, getting rid of items with a deep history is very difficult. He scratched the back of his head with a smile. Grinning, he rubbed his hands together and added that being his other self was much more expensive than this pathetic bag. The sword above Namgung's hand disappeared and he asked what time it was. Kira said it was 3 o'clock. The main character asked why then this place is empty. He said there was a barrier on this side. Namgung praised him for his good work and was relieved that he wouldn't be late. Pure, who had changed back into an elderly man, asked if he was going to do something again. He thought that he knew it and he was definitely up to something since he bought the sword. Frowning, he wondered if he was going to start hunting down the prophets. Namgung replied with a smile that he needed to pick up his daughter. Pure looked at him in surprise. The main character, leaving, waved his hand and said that her classes were ending now and they would see each other later. Pure looked after him in silence. Namgung checked 2 days before the gates of hell opened with his daughter. They're sitting across the table from each other. The main character and his daughter are walking down the street, Namgung holding several shopping bags. They are playing a video game in the room. Namgung is holding a gamepad while sitting on the floor, and his daughter is standing with her foot on his arm, also holding a gamepad. The main character and his daughter are sleeping in a bed. It was a small moment of normalcy in a chaotic life. While tying her shoelaces, Salman asked him if it was the day he mentioned. He said it was true. While examining the contents of her backpack, she asked if these supplies were enough for survival, adding that she had bought them with her own pocket money. Namgung asked if she believed what he told her. She said she believed me. Smiling, she turned to him and said that she believed him because she was always on his side. Namgung smiled back slightly. Salman took his hand. Daejeon National Cemetery. People are standing in front of graves. A guy with short hair, putting his hand to his head, greeted the main character, calling him Captain Nam. Namgung put a hand on his shoulder and asked him how long it had been since they were discharged. He said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Nimhoon said that he has not changed at all, as if he will be ready to return to the service tomorrow if necessary. Looking down, the main character told him not to talk nonsense. Turning to the vending machine, Nimhoon asked with a smile, what about Salman? He said she was sleeping in the car. He agreed and said they were far from Seoul and she was probably tired. Salman is sleeping in the backseat of the car. Nimhoon apologized and said that he should have come to them. Namgung told him not to talk like that and that he specifically allowed her to sleep because it wasn't going to be a pretty sight today. Nimhoon asked in surprise if he was referring to his face. The main character said that he had a reason to meet here instead of in Seoul. He paused for a moment and called out to Nimhoon. He said he had something to tell him. Nimhoon twitched as he sipped from his cup. Turning to him, Namgung asked if he would believe him if he said the world was about to end. Nimhoon spat out water in surprise. Laughing, he asked if he had come this far to make a joke. Looking down seriously, the main character said that he would like it to be a joke. Nimhoon looked at him nervously. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. People were startled and asked what was going on. Someone shouted for them to call 119. Nimhoon exclaimed in surprise as he got to his feet. He started telling the protagonist that they urgently needed to get out of here. He stopped, looking at him in surprise. A sword appeared in Namgung's hand, shrouded in red and black energy. Rising to his feet, the protagonist said with a serious face that he would kill every single one of them. The street was filled with goblins making strange noises. People were running away from them, running past Nimhoon and the main character, and calling for help. Nimhoon said in surprise that they urgently needed to escape from here. Nambyung turned to the goblins running towards him and called out to him. Turning his head to him, he suggested that they survive together this time. Several goblins leapt to attack him. Myung-hoon stretched out his hand in fright, shouting the protagonist's name. He cut down the goblins with a single swing of his sword. Myung-hoon stared at the goblins' severed bodies in surprise. Nambyung asked him to go and get Salmon. Startled, he asked what he was going to do. Nambyung turned around and repeated. Myung-hoon swallowed nervously. Putting his hand to his head, he agreed in an army-style manner. As he ran away, he shouted that he would return. The goblin swings his club, grabbing the frightened woman by the shoulder. Nambyung cut it down with a swing of his sword. He looked up questioningly. A huge green eye could be seen in the sky. From it, a huge army of goblins with spiked clubs began to fall to the ground. People running away shouted, asking what it was. He remembered how Jor had asked to be allowed to give him some advice since he was his protege. Raising his palm, he said that he was the one who decided the fate of the dead. He told him that the moment he wanted to save someone, he would weigh the lives of others. Jor, with a malicious smile, told him to be selfish, because this is the path that the Seven Snakes protege should follow. He said that no matter what he did, he couldn't avoid being called a hypocrite. Nambyung stands with his sword, shrouded in light. He thought that he needed strength even if he had to face the fate of a hypocrite one day. He said they might not remember him and asked if he could ask for their help again in this lifetime. Wrapped in red energy, he said that he, the one who wields more power than anyone else on this earth, is summoning the spirits of his homeland. His eyes snapped open. The graves were shrouded in red light. Streams of energy surged up from the graves. They headed for Namgyung. He stood wrapped in energy, gritting his teeth. The dialogue boxes say, Level 2 soul detection has been activated. Friendly spirits around you resonate with you. Level 2 soul eye has been triggered. The main character clenched his teeth tightly. The dialogue box says, the spirits of the memorial rise within you. Namgyung stands wrapped in a red aura. The dialogue boxes say, you can use soul summon at level 2. The number of souls that can be summoned has exceeded your capability level. Number of available summonable spirits, 0 out of 3. The main character, wrapped in a red aura, calmly exhaled. 3 soldiers in military uniforms rose up from the ground, shrouded in a red aura. Something black enveloped their bodies, and metal masks appeared on their faces. The dead men got down on one knee around the main character. People run away from the goblins attacking them, shouting for help. Myung-hoon swore with Salmon on his back and said that there's no end to them. The goblins surrounded him. He asked how Nambyung was coping with them alone. Turning to the sleeping Salmon, he said that he couldn't believe how she could sleep peacefully in the midst of all this. He asked her if she was hurt. He looked ahead in surprise. A huge army of goblins was falling from the sky in front of him, and he cursed. The goblin leapt at Myung-hoon, swinging the club. The dead man quickly appeared between them, chopping off the goblin's head. Myung-hoon happily called out to Namgyung. He asked what was going on here and who these people were. The main character replied that he would explain the details later. He told him to take the sword. He asked in surprise what he meant by that. Namgyung said there were still a lot of goblins around. He said that he was a promising kendo player and he could handle it. Myung-hoon hesitantly said that he promised his master that he would never raise the sword again, but he needed to save people. He apologized to his master and asked him to forgive his worthless disciple. Taking the sword in both hands, he shouted, "Cry, Hell's Punisher." He asked what the name of the sword was. People scrambled to the top of the hill, trying to escape the goblins, asking why the police weren't coming, and shouting that they didn't want to die here. A small boy was crying at the bottom, and a woman from above noticed her son. The man pulled her back from the edge, shouting that they had to save those who were still alive, and asked where she was going. She shouted that her son was there and demanded to be released. The goblin swung his club from behind the crying child. Swinging his sword, Myung-hoon trumpeted the goblin's head. He smiled and told the boy to go to his mother. Someone shouted for them to take him upstairs, and the woman thanked him. Nambyung watched Myung-hoon kill goblins while swinging his sword. He thought hard that his strength couldn't be displayed openly, so he left the position of leading people to him. In the protagonist's previous life, Myung-hoon was the leader of the armed guardians clan, Myung-hoon of the Tai-san sword. Namgyung thought that, instead, he would lead the people out of the shadows. He stood with his daughter on his back, surrounded by the red-cloaked dead. Myung-hoon and one of the main characters undead fight goblins with their backs to each other. Myung-hoon, gritting his teeth and shouting, plunged his sword into the goblin's head. Panting heavily, he looked at the goblin's corpse and asked if it was the last one. He sat down on the ground and said that it looked like he could finally rest. Hearing the loud sound, Myung-hoon raised his head in surprise and asked what it was. He shouted that they had taken care of all the goblins. He turned slowly to the side. Nambyung frowned, thinking that he was finally here. In front of him was a huge goblin warrior armed with a huge crude sword. He swung his sword, and Myung-hoon blocked the blow. He gritted his teeth, and the goblin knocked him aside with a swing of his sword. Myung-hoon fell to the ground, leaving a crack in the floor. The goblin looked around. He turned and left. The main character approached Moon-hoon and said that it looks like he didn't break his bones and he will be fine. He asked what it was and why he stopped and left. Namgung said he thought he was heading towards the temple. He explained that it was a place built for donations to the Goblin Lord. He said that the goblins were planning to use the memorial tower as their base, and if they didn't discover them, their numbers would quickly start to grow. Moon-hoon cursed, saying that they were doing this to the memorial tower. He asked how he knew such information. Namgung calmly said that this was his second time. Scratching the back of his head, Moon-hoon asked, "Second time what?" The main character replied, "Life." He paused in response. Moon-hoon slapped his forehead and said that he didn't expect anything less from him. He said that he must be very bored since this was his second time and suggested that he get it over with as soon as possible. Namgung told him to calm down because it wouldn't end when they killed the Goblin Warrior. The Goblin Temple. A goblin in a red robe with a hood is lying impressively on a pedestal. The main character said that to stop their plan, they need to kill the world boss, the Goblin Lord. Peeking out from behind the wall, Moon-hoon said that he looked like he couldn't even take a punch, unlike the warriors. Namgung replied that he uses magic, which is why the warriors obey him. Moon-hoon asked if Salmon would be okay. The main character replied that he put her to sleep in case of similar situations. He said that they didn't have anything to worry about because he was going to summon spirit soldiers this time. Moon-hoon exclaimed in surprise. Behind the main character was a spirit wearing a steel mask and a red cloak. Namgung said they would start by killing the Goblin Warriors. He said with a serious face that there would be a lot of things that would surprise him in the future, and he needed to be prepared. Goblin Warrior stands among the bonfires, surrounded by goblins. He turned around in surprise. Namgung threw the sword at him while standing next to the dead goblin. The sword stabbed the Goblin Warrior in the eye, and he shouted something in his own language. Pursing his lips, the protagonist ran towards him. Baring his teeth viciously, the Goblin Warrior covered his eye with his hand and glared at the protagonist. He gripped the sword tightly in his hand and swung it to strike the ground. Namgung leaped forward, and two steel sticks appeared in his hand between his fingers. He stabbed them into the goblin's body. He screamed and shivered in pain, his blue veins bulging. Frowning, the protagonist shouted, "Now!" Moon-hoon leapt at the goblin, swinging his sword. He struck the goblin's neck with his sword. Moon-hoon exclaimed in surprise that the sword wasn't entering his body. The Goblin Warrior bared his teeth angrily. He shouted something loudly in his own language. Moon-hoon asked about the fact that this is just the beginning of his muscle. The main character landed next to him. Moon-hoon said the poison darts were good and asked where he got them. Namgung replied that he took them to Ulji Street Underground Plaza. Moon-hoon exclaimed that it was a popular place in Seoul and said that he wanted to buy an automatic nose hair plucker and he should go there. The main character interrupted him and said that they should finish this before the Goblin Lord intervened. He said they would finish it quickly. The Goblin Warrior shouted while swinging his sword. He swung in front of him, and Namgung ducked out of the way. 3 poison darts appeared in his hand. He threw them forward. The javelins sank into the Goblin Warrior's chest. The blue veins on his body bulged, and he twitched with his mouth open. He crouched down, and the skin around the darts turned blue. Moon-hoon shouted that he wouldn't make a mistake this time. The Goblin Warrior saw a sword coming towards him. Moon-hoon cut off the Goblin Warrior's head with a swing of his sword. As he flexed his shoulders, he said that his bones were so hard that his hands were tired. He added that he still dealt with it with the help of his biceps. The main character pushed the dead goblin with his foot and told him not to relax, because now they will go to the Goblin Lord. He turned to the ruined statue. He noticed that there was no one on the high ground. He asked where the Goblin Lord was. Frowning, he whirled around. He called out to Moon-hoon, who looked in his direction. In front of him was a Goblin Lord in a red hooded robe. In the goblin's hand was a bundle of yellow energy. Moon-hoon asked with a smile, "What is it?" A yellow flash flashed behind him. Spirit Soldier quickly came running, standing between them, and blocked Moon-hoon from the magic strike. He covered his face with his hand, coughing. Spirit Soldier disappeared into thin air. Frowning, the protagonist assumed that it was because Spirit Soldiers had a low growth scale. Squeezing his hand on his chest, he thought that, as he expected, he didn't last long after all. The dialogue box says, "Summon Spirit Soldiers, 2 out of 3. Moon-hoon cursed and ran to attack, swinging his sword. He swung his sword in front of him, but the Goblin Lord blocked the attack by putting up a yellow magic barrier in front of him. The Goblin Lord's eyes snapped open. He put his hands out and Moon-hoon was thrown back by the shock wave. He rolled on the ground, dropping his sword. He asked me what it was. Namgung, picking up the sword from the ground, said it was a shield. He explained that it wasn't an advanced spell, but it was rare at this stage. Moon-hoon glanced at him with a raised eyebrow and asked what they should do. The main character replied with a serious face that they just needed to break it with more force. He replied that there was no way they could surpass that right now. Namgung replied that it couldn't be that they couldn't do it. He said to leave it to the sword itself. Moon-hoon took the sword from his hand and replied that he didn't know what he meant. The main character said it was a cursed item with a soul attached to it. Min-hoon looked around the sword. Namgung put a hand on his shoulder. With a serious face, he told him not to let go of the sword at all. The dialogue box says, triggering the Eye of the Soul, Level 2. Min-hoon held a sword in his hand, shrouded in red energy. The Goblin Lord looked at him in surprise. He shouted something in his own language, and the goblins who were fighting Spirit Soldier turned towards him. The Goblin Lord pointed his hand forward. He shouted something in his own language, and the goblins rushed forward to attack Min-hoon and the protagonist. Namgung frowned. A blade appeared in his hand. The dialogue box says, Demon Hunter's Silver Blade. Rank, Magic, First. A well-sharpened throwing sword. Due to its weak durability, it will shatter after a single use. Produces a deadly effect when it breaks. Price, 1,000 heads. The main character threw the blade forward. It flew towards the goblin's face. The blade cracked as it flew, emitting a bright red light. It exploded, and flames engulfed the goblins. With a frown, Namgung thought that he couldn't buy him any more time, and now it was time for Min-hoon to do his part. Min-hoon snarled, bared teeth covered in black. The dialogue box says, communicating with the soul of the executioner tied to the sword. Min-hoon's eyes were completely red, and he screamed furiously. The dialogue box says, the executioner's spirit craves blood. His legs and arms were covered in black. The ground beneath his feet cracked. Leaving behind a trail of red-black energy, Min-hoon flew towards the Goblin Lord. His face twisted into a mad smile. The Goblin Lord exclaimed in fright in his own language, releasing yellow lightning bolts from his hands. Min-hoon was closing in on him, cutting the flow of yellow energy from the goblin's hands in two. Wrapped in red energy, Min-hoon was smiling crazily. Yellow energy flashed in front of him. His sword pierced through the yellow magic barrier. The Goblin Lord said something startled in his own language. The magic barrier cracked. Min-hoon was even closer with a crazy smile. His sword pierced through the Goblin Lord's chest. It stood over his body, stabbing into his sword. The main character looked up at the sky. The huge green eye in the sky began to close, and the clouds began to disperse. Spirit Soldier cut off the goblin's head with a swing of his sword. The goblin's head fell to the ground beside him. The sky above them cleared and turned blue. Namgung frowned and nodded. The dialogue box says, the Goblin Lord has been defeated. Granting basic reward to all participants within a 150-meter radius. Granting basic reward to all participants within a 50-meter radius. However, the participants with direct influence, regardless of distance, will be granted a participation reward. A success reward will be awarded to the participant who dealt the final blow to the creature. You will be granted loot of the Goblin Lord. The loot can only be claimed by one of the reward claimers. Several shiny chests appeared on the ground. Min-hoon asked in surprise what just happened, and what are these chests? He replied that he had defeated him, and now it was time to pick up his loot. The chests in front of them opened. Dialogue boxes with Goblin Lord's ornament and Goblin Lord's favorite have appeared. The following dialogue box says, Goblin Lord's bracelet. Rank, Magic, Best. A crude bracelet, but it contains Lord's magic. Allows you to use grade 5 shield magic. Limit, 5 times per day. Putting the bracelet on his arm, Min-hoon smiled and said that it was good. He asked the main character whether to give it to him. He replied that he would need it more, and added that he was already wearing it. Looking into the chest, the main character noticed something. The dialogue box says, you have acquired the Goblin Lord's Heart, Rare. Heart with Goblin Lord's Magic. Grants the user the ability to wield magic when consumed. For magic users, the amount of mana increases when consumed. Stats, requires prerequisites for magic. Above his hand was a green heart wrapped in a green aura. Min-hoon said in surprise that this item is very good. Namgung said that it wasn't very useful for those who didn't have an innate talent, and added that they weren't very gifted with magic. As he tucked the heart into his coat, he thought that when the next gate of hell opened, they would find someone to exchange it for, and then they would need to sell it for a high price. He held the heart up to the dialogue box, which began to sparkle with red energy. The dialogue boxes say, would you like to check for talented subjects? Trade is possible between reward recipients. Noticing the words about the recommended subject, the main character thought about whether there was such a function before. He thought that in his previous life, he was too busy hunting demons to meet Salmon. Looking at the heart, he thought it was strange, since neither he nor Min-hoon has any talent for magic. The dialogue box says, suitable target confirmed. Checking the growth potential for the magic factor. A stream of blue energy came out of the protagonist's hand. He started toward the target, and Namgung watched him go. Blue energy enveloped the person lying on the ground. The main character opened his mouth in surprise. The dialogue box says, recommended target, Na Salmon. Magic growth potential, legend grade, best. Salmon was lying on the ground, shrouded in blue energy. Namgung thought that he had never imagined Salmon would have a penchant for magic. He thought that he couldn't have known, since he had lost Salmon shortly after the gates of hell opened. Looking at the green heart, he thought that it wasn't just a matter of having a penchant for magic. After all, it not only had a legendary rank, but also a large growth potential of the best stage. He thought that he had never seen anyone like this before, even in his previous life. Namgung said it was amazing and asked if it meant Salmon was destined to get blood on her hands. Nimhoon told him that if he so wished, he could not awaken Salmon's magic. He said that even they, as adults, have a hard time fighting monsters. Nimhoon raised an eyebrow with a smile and said that even if the world turns into hell, children should live a happier life than they do. Salmon slowly opened her eyes and rubbed them. Sitting up, she noticed Namgung and Nimhoon. Nimhoon said with a smile that she had grown a lot since the last time he saw her. He asked her if she wanted him to take her for a ride on the plane. Salmon got to her feet and said that she was no longer a child. Nimhoon scratched his head. Looking around, she asked what was going on. She paused, looking away in shock. The ground in front of her was littered with the corpses of humans and goblins. Salmon asked if Namgung had said that they would go through this together no matter what. Turning to the main character, she asked if that was what he said to her today. The main character lowered his eyes and apologized. A small boy walked up to Salmon and tugged on her sleeve. She looked at him questioningly. The boy asked for help. She asked me what had happened. The boy pointed to the side and said about the monsters and his mother. He pointed a finger at the woman's body, which had a goblin sword sticking out of it. The boy began to cry loudly. Salmon hugged him from behind. Nimhoon said that she is unexpectedly bold, perhaps because she looks like Namgung. The main character replied that, most likely, she looks like her mother and not like him. Closing his eyes, he said he was weak and tried to protect his child by building walls around her because he was scared. Nimhoon asked if it isn't a natural thing to do. He said with a worried face that it was because he was her father. Namgung looked at him with a small smile. Salmon turned to the main character with a worried face and offered to take the boy with her. Namgung sternly refused. He said that during the Great War, there would be a shelter and he would be safer there than with them. She said he was all alone. He said no meant no. Salmon lowered her head and said that being alone was scary. Pursing her lips and closing her eyes sadly, she said that when her mother went to heaven, he wasn't there for her either. Namgung's eyes widened in shock. Jor walked out of the purple portal and said with a smirk that he had told him so. He asked if a guy who handles death walking on the path of life sounds right to him. Namgung and Salmon looked at him in surprise. Jor praised them for defeating the Goblin Lord. He said that according to the plan, the citadel was supposed to be built before midnight, spreading goblins all over the city. He said that things have gotten very twisted. The main character asked what he was talking about, and isn't it true that the more active he is, the better it is for him? Holding up his index finger, Jor said that was the case, but narrow-minded higher-ups disagreed. He said they weren't happy that he was commanding the dead as soldiers before the carnival started. Namgung frowned and asked what was wrong with him using the funds he had. He said to tell them to back off. With a big smile, he replied that they were right and it should all start at the carnival. The main character asked why. Jor pointed his finger at it and said it was because it wasn't balanced. He said that he controls the souls of patriots and can even use the powers of ancient gods and heroes. Namgung replied that, given his status, before trying to say anything about the rules, he should think about how to protect him. Chuckling, he replied that he knew he would do so he came to offer him a compromise. Raising his head with his eyes closed, he said that it was simple, and he should give his life for his life. He explained that he had already absorbed a few spirits, so he needed to pay the price for it. Opening his eyes, he said that the rules required an equal exchange, but since they were also at fault, they would settle this matter with one life. Jor pointed a finger at the child. He said he was going to leave it here anyway. The child and Salmon were holding each other, looking at him worriedly. Jor said with a smirk that it was better to kill him now than let him interfere with them later. Namgung opened his eyes in surprise. Salmon furiously asked what this nonsense was. She punched Jor in the face. She asked him who he was to tell others who to kill. He glared at her. A stream of red energy appeared from behind him, sweeping Salmon up. He slammed it into the wall. Salmon coughed up the blood pressed against the wall. Namgung lunged at him, his hand outstretched. A red stream of energy caught up with him. Nimhoon threw at Jor, swinging his sword and demanding to stop. The red stream of energy caught up with him, too. The red tentacles from Jor's back grabbed the three of them, and he was standing in front of the boy who had fallen to the ground. With a big smile, he said that even though he liked him, if his daughter crossed the line, she needed to be taught a lesson. Namgung retorted, gritting his teeth and trying to get out of the red snake's grip. Jor asked if they should end it by taking their lives, Salmon's life, or the lives of the boy and Nimhoon. He told him to shut up and make a choice. The main character cursed angrily. A green heart fell out of his coat. It fell to the stone floor. His heart lit up with a bright blue light, and Jor looked at him with a satisfied grin. The blue light headed towards Salmon. Shrouded in the blue light, Jor laughed and said it was all right. Gritting his teeth, Namgung realized that he had noticed Salmon's penchant from the beginning, and had done so on purpose to create this situation. Closing his eyes, he apologized to Salmon and said that at least he wanted to save her, and that it was his fault. Salmon said it wasn't his fault. Smiling, she looked at him and said that even in the future, there was no way he could have made a wrong choice. She said she trusted him. The dialogue box says, "A frail soul is soothing," named Salmon. Behind Salmon, who was shrouded in blue light, a woman in a white dress appeared. The red energy around her dissipated. The dialogue box says, "The soul is contributing to Salmon's awakening. The magic trade is transforming." Salmon's eyes filled with tears. She opened her eyes, and one eye was red and the other blue. The dialogue box says that her magic has been transformed into perception magic. Namgun looked at her in surprise. Salmon stood erect, shrouded in blue light. She held up her hands. Folding her hands in front of her, she created a purple sphere and, frowning, shouted that this scoundrel was to blame. A large purple beam of energy shot out from her hands at Jor, who was calmly looking towards him. He grinned broadly. He raised his hand to meet the violet beam of energy. He held out his palm with a grin, and it absorbed the purple energy. Jor said it was cute. Clenching his fist in front of his face, he said that she used mythical level magic. He told Namgung that he seems to have found someone more interesting than himself. The red snakes dispersed, and the main character and Myung-hoon fell to the ground. Salmon, wrapped in blue energy, stood with her hands outstretched and told Jor not to move. She was breathing heavily. Her eyes rolled up and she fell to the ground. Jor approached her and said that perception magic was a magic that required a lot of mana, and for her, an ordinary child who had just awakened her magic powers, it would be too much. He crouched down next to her, one hand outstretched, and Salmon was bathed in blue light. Namgun called out angrily. Holding onto his hand, he told him not to dare touch his daughter. He said he didn't care if he was a higher being or something else, and he would kill him. Jor replied with a calm grin that he wasn't going to do anything to her and was just trying to help her. Salmon, wrapped in blue energy, was breathing heavily as she lay on the ground. She calmed down, her breathing became even, and she smiled contentedly without waking up. Jor told the main character that he should thank his daughter. He said that the other higher beings seemed to like it, so they would let them get away with it. Namgung silently lifted Salmon into his arms. Jor told him to remember that now he must protect his daughter not only from monsters, but also from higher beings who want to get her. Frowning, the protagonist replied that he, as his supreme being, shouldn't just watch idly. A red sphere fell to the ground next to him. Jor said with a smirk that this item should be created after the Goblin Castle was completed. The dialogue box says, "Goblin Citadel Crystal Ball." A crystal ball that creates a cave-level shelter. You could expand the shelter by raising its level. Jor said that the higher beings wanted to give it to him as a reward at the next carnival, so he took it away from them. Grinning, he asked if he was doing a great job as the god he had contracted to work so hard for. The main character remained silent. Jor, standing in front of the purple portal, said that he will continue to watch them in the future and that they need to stay alive for the sake of his winnings. Namgun watched him go in silence. Salmon slowly opened her eyes. Getting up in the backseat of the car, she asked what had happened. She said that she just fought with Jor. Myung-hoon said that she lost consciousness due to mana overload. She asked what was wrong with that child. Myung-hoon asked if she was talking about Hosung. He said that they had already sent him to the shelter in Dijin. Salmon pulled the main character's hair and said that she told him that they should take him with them. Namgung replied that it was much safer there than going with them. He thought that, thanks to Jin Seok from the army, the shelter in Dijin is the safest place in South Korea. He told her that there was a man named Jin Seok there, and they knew each other in past lives. Salmon crossed her arms resentfully and spread her legs wide. The main character said that he is a person that he trusts, so they don't need to worry. She said he said the shelter in Dijin was safe and asked where they were going now. He said they were going to Seoul. He said that after the first gate of hell closed, a new one opened in Seoul. The island in the middle of the river is shrouded in a dome of blue energy. Namgung put his face on his hand and said that if they want to prevent an even bigger disaster, they need to get a reward for this dungeon. Salmon looked away intently. Myung-hoon asked the main character about something called a prophet, a person chosen by higher beings. Namgung replied that it was true. Myung-hoon asked what they should do now. The main character replied that it was nothing special, just to become stronger. They drive across a bridge full of wrecked cars. Urgent traffic news was announced on the radio. The voice reported that train service was suspended due to rail damage, and the Paju Expressway was closed due to the destruction of Seosin Junction. Myung-hoon said with a frown that it looked like using the highway would be difficult. He said he would be fine because he was a strong man. He was Salmon on board. He said he believes they should use the national road. Frowning, he looked ahead in surprise. The goblin fell on the windshield, shattering it. They skidded to a stop. Myung-hoon asked what it was and if Salmon was okay. Salmon replied that she was fine. Namgung thought that there were still those who hadn't been taken care of yet. He got out of the car. Something flew past his face, grazing his cheek. The arrow hit the goblin behind him in the head. In front of him was a bespectacled guy wearing a tracksuit, armed with a bow. He apologized and said that the monsters suddenly started running at him. Namgung told him to speak after he lowered his bow. Lowering his head, the guy apologized. Namgung, looking at the dead goblins, asked if he had killed them all. The guy replied that it was true. Myung-hoon said with a smile that he had good eyesight because it was midnight and he was only aiming at their vital spots. The main character thought that an ordinary civilian killed 5 monsters using only one bow. He thought that since he was so talented, he might have met him in his previous life. Namgung asked for his name. The guy replied that his name was Jeon Jong-in. Myung-hoon asked how he ended up in this mess because everyone was told to stay home on the radio. Jeon Jong-in said he needed to go to Seoul. He said his father was in the hospital and couldn't get in touch with him. Namgung thought that he now understood why he hadn't met him in his previous life, since even a talented mage like Salmon couldn't survive. He told him to just go home because he couldn't make it halfway on his bike and would die. With his head bowed, Jeon Jong-in asked for help and a ride to Seoul. He said that he would definitely repay them. Namgung asked about the payment. There was a purple stone in Jeon Jong-in's hands and he said that he would repay it. He said he didn't know what it was, but it appeared when the monsters were dying. After picking up the stone, Myung-hoon said that neither he nor the main character keep the stones as pets. Namgung ran up to him and grabbed his arm. He asked if it appeared when the goblins were dying. Myung-hoon nervously said that growing a rock as a pet is the best hobby. The main character looked at the purple stone in surprise and said that it shouldn't appear now. Their car is driving on a busy road. The main character asked if he really wasn't lying. Jeon Jong-in replied that the stone actually fell out of the goblin. Namgung frowns at the purple stone. He said it was an agility rune. During the carnival, a person can receive 2 types of power, nature, and characteristics. The dialogue box says, lowest grade Rhine, agility. When used, it slightly boosts the agility stat. Nature is special talents given at birth. Stats, on the other hand, are the power that anyone can acquire by raising them. Runes are unique items that enhance these characteristics. Everyone wants to get them, but the chances of getting them from a monster are extremely low. Namgung said that, technically, there was a chance that they might have fallen off the goblin. Jeon Jong-in asked if the stone was rare. Frowning, the protagonist thought that this wasn't due to luck. Turning to the boy, he asked where he learned to shoot arrows. Jeon Jong-in replied that his father, a former representative of the country, taught him. He added that he is now bedbound due to an accident. Myung-hoon thoughtfully recalled the person with the surname Jeon from the national archery team. Jeon Jong-in said that his name is Jeon Teo. The main character thought that, as he expected, it was the athlete's son, Jeon Teo. In the past life, Jeon Teo was a rune master, possessing an exceedingly rare nature shared only with Anna Lion. Clans worldwide vied to recruit him, but Jeon Teo had been comatose for 7 years following an accident. As everyone clamored to awaken him, Saint Tessera, one of the 8 martial stars, spent a lot of money to use an elixir. However, despite her title, she did sinister deeds behind the scenes. She killed Jeon Teo for refusing the clan's offer. Namgung thought with a serious face that this time would be different. Myung-hoon asked if he should go to the hospital. The main character said that they need to stop somewhere first. Jeon Jong-in exclaimed that they promised to bring him to his father. Salmon supported him. He asked what if something happened to him while they were delayed. The main character replied that nothing would change if they went right now. He said that judging from the goblin situation, the police, firefighters, and even the army were all activated all over Korea. He said that at such times, they prioritize the stabilization of medical facilities, so the hospital will be safer than this road. Namgung said it would be better for them to save up their heads, because it wouldn't make any difference if they went there. Jeon Jong-in asked what they meant by that. The main character replied that they could cure his father with an elixir. Jeon Jong-in frowned and asked about the elixir. Namgung replied that the elixir costs 400,000 heads, and there is no place else where you can quickly collect this amount. Myung-hoon said with a smile that he was lucky that they were going to the dungeon. Salmon told Jeon Jong-in that this is her father's second life and he knows everything. She said that if he joined them, there would be great rewards waiting for him. Raising an eyebrow, he asked even if they saved up heads, or would they be able to buy the elixir. The main character replied that he would find out soon enough. The display in the car says it's midnight. Several bright yellow rays hit the road from the sky, scattering cars. Salmon asked in surprise what it was. Namgung said, right on cue. A foot landed on the wheel of a car. It was Yaksha. People look out of their car windows, asking what it is and what's going on. Yaksha grinned, holding up his index finger, and told them to listen carefully. With a wicked smile, he said that from now on, the phases offered them, the carnival audience, a chance to awaken. The woman ran away in fright. The guy shouted at Yaksha to get out of the way. Yaksha shouted loudly for them to be quiet. He used Yaksha's roar, and a stream of yellow energy blew away the people and cars in front of him. There was a burning trail in the ground in front of him. Wiping his mouth, he asked if they knew to listen when someone was talking. He said that all the necessary information would be automatically transferred to their minds, so there was no need for a detailed explanation, but as a formality, he would make an announcement. Yaksha said that the rules of the holiday are simple, but he was interrupted by a car horn. He glared furiously to the side. Yaksha asked what kind of fool honks his horn in his car. Nambyung got out of the car and said it was him. Frowning, he insulted Yaksha. Yaksha, recognizing him, clenched his teeth nervously. The main character said that his words are a bit short. Myung-hoon asked if it was the Yaksha he was talking about. He said that he looked stronger than a goblin. Yaksha, coming up to them, asked if he dared to compare him to a goblin. Yaksha put his hand on the main character's shoulder. He quietly and fearfully asked him how he knew he was here. He asked to spare a part of it because there are many witnesses here. Nambyung said he would say a multiple. He told him to open up everything from his bundle to his heart pouch. Yaksha was surprised to say that they hadn't even signed a contract, and he wanted his heart pouch. After giving him a threatening look, the protagonist asked if he would rather give him the elixir. Yaksha replied in fright that he was worth 400,000 heads. He didn't have even close to that much. Nambyung said his scars had healed. Yaksha hesitantly grabbed his hand and said that he couldn't do it because breaking the rules would get him in trouble, especially since the carnival had already started. Jeon Jong-in asked him what he was talking about with such a monster that was just setting up a mayhem here. Myung-hoon replied that he wasn't sure, but it was still Nambyung's second life, so even if something strange was happening, it was best not to think too hard about it. Yaksha and the main character climb up the cars, talking about something. Jeon Jong-in once again didn't believe the words about a second life. Yaksha bowed and Nambyung waved as he left. Myung-hoon noticed that they seemed to be done. Saman asked what they had been talking about for so long. Behind them, the Yaksha started explaining the rules of the carnival to the people again. Nambyung replied that he spent his pocket money on survival items. He looked away. The island next to the burning city was covered by a blue dome. Nambyung said they would need them to survive there. Holding his head with his hand, Jeon Jong-in said that all the explanations about the carnival appeared in his head. He asked me what was going on. Nambyung replied that Yaksha was inserting basic information about the carnival into people's heads, and he did so as soon as the carnival was announced. Yaksha, standing on the cars, laughed and told the people to try to survive. Opening his mouth in surprise, Jeon Jong-in wondered if this was possible in reality and if the words about his second life were true. Myung-hoon asked the main character what they should do with the car. As he took off his coat, he told him to pick her up. Opening his mouth in surprise, Myung-hoon asked if it was really possible to enter the dungeon by car. He imagined himself knocking down goblins with a car. While rummaging through the trunk of the car, Nambyung told him that he would go to Sinchon. He explained that the exit of the dungeon was there, and they would meet up there when they were done. Myung-hoon asked why the kids would fight in the dungeon and he, an adult, couldn't. He replied that there would be an even bigger battle in Sinchon, the time of dusk. Nambyung held up something and said that thanks to the information they had found out, he now knew about it too. He said that a fixed number of monsters appear from the gates of hell, and even if they close the gates of hell earlier, there is an event in which the remaining monsters still appear at once, and it is called the time of dusk. Myung-hoon exclaimed in surprise that, then, even if they quickly closed the gates of hell, the damage would be the same in the end. As he closed the trunk, he said that was why he would go there. Turning to him, Nambyung said that he would have to protect the people. Myung-hoon looked at him in surprise. He smacked his chest with a smile and said to rely on him. Frowning, the protagonist thought that there might be a lot of casualties for sure, but it was also an opportunity to earn a lot of goals. He thought that by purchasing the elixir, they would have the opportunity to gain the trust of Rune Master Jeon Teo. Putting on his black coat, he said that they would clear the dungeon as quickly as possible and join him. He called Saman and Jeon Jong-in. The arrow sank into the zombie's head. Jeon Jong-in exhaled while holding the bow. Saman stood there, frowning, her hands outstretched, blue and red energy pouring out. Jeon Jong-in looked at it and said in surprise that it was really magic. He wondered if the reality he knew was no longer there. Saman told the protagonist that he should have told her beforehand that there would be zombies in the dungeon. She said it was very similar to the live action of Underworld she had seen on the internet. Jeon Jong-in asked her in surprise how she could be so calm after encountering such zombies. Saman replied that modern children are not afraid of zombies because they played Underworld. She added that she likes to stream it sometimes. Jeon Jong-in asked if she was talking about a popular game. He said he wasn't very good at games. Closing her eyes, she replied that she had a talent for them. Saman said that she can only think of one person who plays better than her, named Flame. She added that this dungeon is very simple. Nambyung told her not to overexert herself because she might overload like last time. She agreed. The main character looked at the crowd of zombies from behind the wall. He called out to Jeon Jong-in. He responded. The arrows quickly sank into the zombies' heads. The main character, raising an eyebrow, said that he had hit them all in the head. He asked if he was going to try to become a professional athlete like his father. Jeon Jong-in replied that he started shooting arrows well when the goblins appeared. He said he felt like the target was getting bigger. Namgung assumed that he had awakened his archery skills. He thought that he expected his talent to be related to runes like Jeon Tio. He asked what else had changed. Putting his hand on his chest, he said that he had a feeling that something was changing and that he would say when he was sure. Salmon stepped between them and pointed forward in surprise. At the other end of the room, there was a chest wrapped in a purple aura and surrounded by zombies. She ran towards him, destroying the zombies along the way with streams of blue and red energy from her hands. Namgung held out his hand and shouted for her to stop. Salmon kept running, shooting magic from her hands. The protagonist gritted his teeth and thought that she couldn't hear him over the explosion. He thought that if his memory was correct, there was a trap in this dungeon. He shouted at Jeon Jong-in to shoot the chest. Jeon Jong-in pulled the bowstring, frowning. Salmon happily reached for the chest, and an arrow flew by her side. There was an explosion. Shielding himself from the explosion with his hands, the protagonist called out to Salmon. A silhouette of a man stands in a scattering cloud of dust. Salmon's hair was disheveled from the explosion, and she asked what it was. Namgung ran over to her, glad that she was okay. He went down to her and took her by the shoulders, telling her that it was a dungeon trap. She explained that thanks to Jeon Jong-in, she avoided a direct hit, but if she opened the chest, she would die instantly. Jeon Jong-in asked about instant death. He opened his mouth in surprise and thought that he should have warned about this beforehand. Salmon said in frustration that it was sad. The main character objected and said that this is good. There was a golden key on the ground. Namgung held it up in his hand and said it was the key to the boss room. They were standing in front of a huge door. The main character touched the door with his hand and said that the Ghoul King was waiting for them behind it. Salmon and Jeon Jong-in gulped nervously. Myung-hoon is driving along the road and says that there is very heavy traffic here. He said it was the main character's car and he couldn't just throw it anywhere. An announcement was made. This is an ad from the Central Control Office of the National Emergency Management Agency. All residents of Seoul are urged to immediately evacuate to the nearest shelters. People panicked and ran around Myung-hoon, who asked in surprise what was going on. He looked out of the car and frowned in surprise, wondering if it had already started. There was a huge yellow hole in the sky. People were running away in panic. The dialogue box says, "The time of dusk has come." The door opened for Namgung and the others. There were several large zombies standing behind it. The dialogue box says, "You've entered the Ghoul King's tomb." Before opening the door, the main character said that there was not only a Ghoul King in the room, but also 4 elite zombies. He said that unless they killed them, the Ghoul King would not fall. Salmon speculated that elite zombies wouldn't die from a single hit. Jeon Jong-in suggested that if they worked together, they would be able to deal with them one at a time. Namgung objected and said that the Ghoul King would resurrect them endlessly. He said that, in other words, if they didn't destroy all 4 of them at once, they wouldn't even be able to scratch the Ghoul King. Salmon asked if he had bought something from Yaksh. She said that he would use it in the dungeon. The main character said that this is so. The dialogue box says, "Paladin Raoul's pendant. Grade, rare, highest. The relic of Raoul, the greatest paladin of the past. Bestows the power of purification upon the bearer." Holding the necklace in his hands, Namgung said that with this, they would be able to slow down the zombies' resurrection. He said that keeping all 4 of them from being resurrected at the same time would be difficult. The main character frowned. A voice in the city shouted that the first line of defense had fallen. Soldiers shoot from machine guns and submachine guns. A voice shouted that the second line was also in danger. A scarred man shouts over the radio that they need air support. On the other side of the line, they asked if there were any chances that there were survivors. Frowning, the man said that they had already checked with the heat detector and there were no civilians in Summoning Point. He asked if it wasn't true that goblins from all over the world were being summoned here. He shouted that if they didn't kill them now, they would get out of control. The man shouted that the damage would surpass what happened when the gates of hell opened. He was told that even if there were no survivors, the media would find something to complain about and make a fuss, blaming the army for the destruction of the city. They suggested keeping public opinion in mind. The man shouted if they were willing to sacrifice them just to preserve their image. Cursing, he hung up the radio receiver. A soldier shouted that a civilian car was approaching. The man asked in surprise if they knew what was going on here. He said to get them out of here quickly. The soldier started to say something worriedly. The car drives along the city road, knocking down goblins. Myung-hoon furiously holds onto the steering wheel, baring his teeth. The veins on his face were swollen. The soldier said he thought he was crazy. Behind the 4 elite zombies, the Ghoul King sits on a throne. Namgung, surrounded by spirit soldiers, said they were coming. Salmon swung her hand, shrouded in blue and cyan energy. She put her hands out, and the energy streams tore off the elite zombie's arms. The elite zombie slammed its hand on the ground, and Jeon Jong-in dodged by jumping to the side. He asked how he did it if his body was torn apart. He pulled the bowstring and thought that he should have just gone to the hospital. The arrow punched a hole in the elite zombie's head. The protagonist's soldiers rushed forward. They swung their swords and chopped off the elite zombie's legs, causing it to fall to the floor. Namgung held up a necklace that shone a purple light on the zombie. As he passed the zombie that had fallen to the ground, he urged them to finish the other three quickly. Salmon and Jeong fight zombies. The main character stands with a purple glowing necklace in front of him. The Ghoul King sits on a throne. Pointing a finger forward, he said something in his own language. Jeong said that he was just sitting there the whole time. He asked what he suddenly said. Salmon asked in surprise about coming back to life. Namgung looked at her and thought that he understood the Ghoul King's words. He assumed it was because of Sua's influence. He thought that if her mother's soul interfered with her awakening, it might explain her newfound non-elemental magic power. The main character thought it was just a theory because he had never seen anything like it in his previous life. He told Salmon to keep telling them what the Ghoul King was saying. She agreed. The wounds on the zombie's body began to regenerate. The zombie raised its head, which was returning to its normal appearance. The zombies rose to their feet. One of them hit the ground, and Namgung jumped out of the way. As he landed, he thought about how it would never end with just one necklace. He looked at the necklace in his hand and thought that he had never tried it in his previous life, but it didn't seem like there was any other way. Namgung raised the necklace above his head and shouted for Salmon to shoot her magic at him. He thought that he would spread Salmon's magic through this necklace to destroy everyone in one hit. The zombie swung its fist. The main character jumped away from the blow. He stands surrounded by zombies. With her hands outstretched, Salmon cried out with tears in her eyes that she felt like she wasn't going to make it. She saw Jeong pulling the string of his bow. He shot two zombies in the head with one shot. Namgung praised him for his good work and held up the necklace, shouting at Salmon to shoot now. The necklace in his hand glowed purple. The zombie knocked the necklace out of the main character's hands, and the glass in it broke. It fell to the floor. The two zombies gripped the protagonist's soldiers with their hands, and they disappeared. The Ghoul King leaned forward, grinning and saying something in his own language. Salmon asked in shock if this was the end. Namgung was sitting on the floor, surrounded by zombies. He was clutching the broken necklace in his hand, and it was bleeding. With a sinister grin, he said that this was just the beginning. The zombies charged at him. Namgung held the broken glass between his fingers. He swung his arms and threw the shards at the two zombies. They stabbed into their chests, and they lost their balance. The zombie in front of the main character swung his hand to attack. Namgung grabbed his head with his hand. Frowning, he gave Salmon the command. Salmon held out her hands, shooting out red and blue magic. Her magic hit the zombies around the main character. The Ghoul King sat up, shouting something in his own language. Namgung walked up to him and told him it was his turn. The zombie lunged at him, one arm outstretched. A black spirit appeared behind the protagonist, and Namgung told the zombie to move away. The spirit cut off the zombie's arm and head with a single swing of its sword. The Ghoul King shouted something in his own language. A black blade pierced through his head. Next to the main character, a spirit stood with its sword thrust into the Ghoul King's head. The Ghoul King's chest moved. The skin on it tore, and his sharp ribs began to move. They stabbed into the main character's body, and he coughed up blood. One of the spikes pierced his chest. Salmon called out to him worriedly. A man in a military uniform recognized Myung-hoon sitting in the car. He asked in surprise why he was here. He said with a smile that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Grinning, Myung-hoon raised one eyebrow and said that he is a hero who appears when the world needs him. As he got out of the car, he said that the boss would come here sooner or later. The man asked in surprise if he meant Namgung. Myung-hoon confirmed. Crossing his arms over his chest, he said that until then, they should hold this position. The man scratched his head and said he understood. He said they didn't have any free weapons for them. Myung-hoon replied that there was no need. Grinning, he took out his sword and said that he had something incredible. The man opened his mouth in surprise when he saw the sword appear out of thin air. He asked if he was going to fight the practically bulletproof monsters with a sword. Myung-hoon said that he should already know about the gates of hell and Yaksha because they were loaded with information. The man raised his eyebrows. Myung-hoon said that guns are no longer considered weapons. Grinning, he handed him the taunts and told him that they were now real weapons. The dialogue box says, Ogre Tonfa. Grade, normal, best. Made from ogre bones. Nothing extraordinary, but incredibly durable. Said to be capable of crushing the heads of magical beings in a single blow. The man picked up the tonfas. Myung-hoon said he handled them well in their platoon. He said they were quite different, and he bought them with all the rewards he had, so he should treat them like his fiancée. Myung-hoon glanced at him, grinning contentedly. The man looked at him, his lips pursed. He dropped the machine gun to the ground. They took up a fighting stance next to each other. Salmon ran towards her father, holding out her hand and shouting at him. Jeong put his hand on her shoulder and asked her to wait. Adjusting his glasses on his nose, he said that he felt like he could handle this situation on his own. His eyes glowed yellow. He said discovery. The Ghoul King, in whose hands the protagonist's soldier had disappeared, turned in their direction. Jian Zhong's arrow pierced through the Ghoul King's chest. As Nambyung turned to look at them, he wondered if his chest was his weak spot and not his head. Jian Zhong calmly told Salmon to immobilize the Ghoul King. Salmon, not understanding his sudden change in behavior, agreed. She shot magic from her hands. Jian Zhong's arrow pierced the Ghoul King's shoulder. Looking at Edoy in surprise, Nambyung wondered what he was planning to do and why he was aiming for Plachai instead of the head. He thought that with his skill, it should have been an accurate shot. Jian Zhong said to do the same thing again without dealing damage to the head. Salmon fired magic from her hands. The Ghoul King deflected her magic with a wave of his hands. Salmon exclaimed in surprise that he had deflected her magic. The Ghoul King lunged at her. Jian Zhong released his bowstring. The arrow pierced the Ghoul King's chest. He fell to the ground, smoking. The Ghoul King crumbled. Holding his wound with his hand, Nambyung said that since he killed him with simple arrows, he didn't really need to use the necklace. He asked how he did it. Jian Zhong scratched his head and said a little doubtfully that some of their body parts were shiny. He said that if you aim at them in order and kill them, they will drop runes. The main character, picking up a blue stone from the ground, asked what the odds were. After thinking about it, Jian Zhong replied that not all of them shine. He said that he called it an opening, and if an enemy shines, runes fall from it with a 100% chance. The main character, looking at the stone in his hand, thought that killing the Ghoul King without a necklace could mean more than just dropping runes. Nambyung thought it was either the creatures with shining runes or chance. He thought that if it was a matter of chance, he could get some runes by combining his skills with Jian Tio. He thought he had a valuable one. Salmon exclaimed as she found the chest wrapped in a blue aura. She asked about the fact that this time it should be real. The chest opened. The dialogue boxes say, batch reward chest granted. Nambyung looked inside the chest, grinning ominously. He thought it was a jackpot. The dialogue box says, you've acquired Ghoul King's silver, normal. 15 heads. Can be exchanged for heads through the proxy clan. Trade available among reward recipients. You've acquired Ghoul King's gold, normal. 15,000 heads. Salmon, holding his face in his hands, rejoices at the money he has received. The dialogue box says, you've acquired Ghoul King's aura gloves, magic. Trade available among reward recipients. Jian Zhong, holding a glove wrapped in a green aura, asked what it was. The dialogue box says, Ghoul King's aura gloves. Grade, magic, best. Enhances concentration. It stinks. He holds up the gloves with 2 fingers and talks about how they only have one function and they stink. Nambyung, holding a bag of gold coins in his hands, said that concentration is needed not only for accurate attacks. He said it was useful for everything from crafting magic items to using magic. He added that the smell would fade. Jian Zhong put a glove on his hand since it's so good. He pinched his nose against the stench. He threw up rainbow vomit, and the main character said that it would take 3 years for the smell to completely disappear. He said that the main reward is here. Jian Zhong abruptly turned to him with an exasperated face. The dialogue box says, Ghoul King's old keys. Grade, magic, best. A key of Kranto, the emperor who conquered all of the continent, Aransar. Holding a bunch of keys, Nambyung said that this key can open the Ghoul King's treasury, and it looks like there is a key for each of them on the bunch. Salmon asked about the paper in his hand. He said that if they use this scroll in the treasury, a new dungeon will appear. The main character said that if they went underground, they would split up. He told them not to be surprised if they were alone. He handed them the keys. Salmon said thoughtfully that she needed to choose one of the doors, and said that the most important part was that once you entered the door, you couldn't go back. Jian Zhong asked Nambyung which would be the best choice. The main character replied that he hadn't cleaned out this place in his previous life, so he didn't know. All he knew, he said, was that the man who cleaned out the place got the crown of Kundal. He explained that it was an item for necromancers, so it would be useless to them. Jian Zhong thought about saying that this is his second life, but there's a lot he doesn't know. Nambyung went ahead and said that this was the first dungeon, so they didn't need to be too careful when choosing the door. He said that Myung-hoon was probably already waiting for them, and hurried them on. Nambyung closed his eyes. He opened his eyes, looking up. He found himself in a huge high tower. The main character said that this place is huge, and it is even more impressive than Jor's East Gate. He added that they were talking about the Emperor, and it was true. He walked forward. Noticing something, Nambyung turned to the door. It says Mornu's Thorn Blade on the door. The main character said that, as he expected, there were only names on each door, but no explanations. He thought about how Mornu's Thorn Blade was an item he had seen in his previous life. These are the twin daggers used by the Japanese demon hunter Shinomiya. Nambyung didn't think it was important enough to take it now. The main character continued to move up the tower. He touched the door. Grinning, he said it was coming from here. Nambyung said he only heard rumors and couldn't figure out how to get them. It says on the door, Balansar's book. He said that it turns out it was possible to get it so early. The main character pulled the door handle. He found himself in a room bathed in purple light. In the center of the room, on a pedestal, was a purple book. The dialogue box says, Book of Balansar. Grade, Magic, Best. A book penned by the odd mage Balansar during his youth. Trade one item for another at random. Items can range in grade from normal to rare. The new item is independent of the original item's grade. The book is consumed upon use. Jeon, Jongin, and Saman are sitting on the floor. They turned at the sound. Namgung stepped out of the portal. He approached them and asked if they had made a good choice. Jeon Jongin said that he thought through everything, but the information was strange and he wasn't sure if he made the right decision. Saman asked Namgung to look at her bracelet and held out her hand. The protagonist took a look at her bracelet and said that when she sleeps with the healing effects activated, her magic power is slightly enhanced. He said it was a great choice. Jeon Jongin said he chose it. He drew a sword from his back. Namgung asked why he took the sword instead of the bow. He asked if there was a bow in there. Jeon Jongin said that he just liked the name. The main character asked if he knew how to fight with a sword. Jeon Jongin repeated with a grin that he liked the name. Namgung looked at him in silence, his face contorted with displeasure. A man in a soldier's uniform cuts off the heads of goblins with tonfa blows. Myung-hoon swung his sword and cut the goblin in half. They stand with their backs to each other, surrounded by goblins. The man with the nervous grin said that these tonfas were great. Myung-hoon agreed. The man said that because there were only two of them, there was no end in sight to the goblins. Myung-hoon asked with a smirk if he was tired already. He asked what had happened to the endurance king of their squad. Smiling nervously, the man asked if he had the strength to joke after seeing this. Myung-hoon turned back. A huge crowd of angry goblins is running from the descent underground. The soldiers are shouting that their troops are at their limit and they need to retreat. Myung-hoon shouted out what would become of Sinchon then. He shouted at them to stop bragging and kill at least one more. The man protested that their troops were exhausted. The goblin's sword is flying in the air. Myung-hoon turned around. The man opened his mouth wide as he noticed the approaching sword. Myung-hoon leaped forward, covering him with his body, and the sword stabbed into his back. The man called out to him. Myung-hoon crouched down, trembling. He can hardly talk about the paralyzing poison. The man crouched down next to him and shouted that they urgently needed to retreat to treat his wounds. Myung-hoon objected and said he was fine. The man protested that it was goblin poison and they didn't know what it was made of, so he urgently needed medical attention. Struggling to his feet, Myung-hoon said that if they retreated, Sinchon would fall and the goblins would scatter all over Seoul. He grabbed the man's wrist and told him to continue fighting not just as a soldier, but as Kang Ha-jun. He gritted his teeth and there were noticeable bruises under his eyes. Kang Ha-jun opened his eyes wide. He clenched his tonfa. The goblins turned to look at him. Kang Ha-jun walked up to them, panting heavily, armed with two tonfas. A young guy is interviewed on the news. They asked him what he had seen. The guy replied that he was too wild to be called a human. He assumed he wasn't human because in his hands, the goblins were tearing apart like scraps of paper. The interviewer asked if he had fought them alone. The boy replied that there was a man with a huge sword with him. He was asked if he thought they might be prophets. The interviewer replied that this word was mentioned by the British actor Alec Traman at yesterday's press conference, saying that the prophets are saviors who will save the world. The guy nervously replied that he didn't know. He said they were more like destroyers than saviors. Kang Ha-jun stands surrounded by goblin corpses. A goblin with a flower on its head stabs a soldier with a sword. A man in soldier's clothing is dressed between the corpses of goblins. The goblin with the flower turned around in surprise. Kang Ha-jun was standing in front of him with a threatening expression. The goblin with the color asked in fright what it was. A huge goblin stepped between them, and he told the goblin with the flower in his own language to leave it to him. The goblin with the flower wanted to object. A huge goblin interrupted him and shouted to get out of here quickly. Myung-hoon asked in surprise if it was a warrior. He added that he was smaller than the goblin warrior they had encountered last time. Frowning, he said that even if this warrior was smaller, it would be too dangerous for Kang Ha-jun to face him alone. He glanced at the car. Kang Ha-jun is standing in front of a huge goblin. He said with empty eyes that the goblin was big. The goblin swung his fist, and Kang Ha-jun blocked the blow by thrusting out his tonfa. Gritting his teeth, he said, his punch is weak. When he swung the tonfa, he said that his blow was different, and it was a real blow. He hit the goblin's torso and it bent over. The goblin exclaimed in surprise in its own language about how strong the man was. Kang Ha-jun, alias Ogre. He was able to control his breathing. By using this ability, he can minimize the flow of blood to his brain. It does this in order to preserve the blood absorbed by the brain. The adult brain consumes approximately 20% of all oxygen received by the respiratory system. In other words, it uses an average of 600 milliliters of oxygen per minute. It also requires a considerable amount of glucose. By using this high-quality blood in his muscles rather than in his brain, he loses some of his brain functions and gains superhuman strength along with increased tissue regeneration. This is Kang Ha-jun's ogre state. The huge goblin crouched down, one hand on its chest. He thought in his own language that the man was a monster. Kang Ha-jun stood in front of him, picking up a tonfa. The goblin with the flower ran up to him and plunged his sword into him. A huge goblin called out to Lily about telling her to come here. Lily's back was to him. Turning around, she smiled and said that it was because he was her valued companion. The huge goblin was moved. A bloody flower fell from the goblin's head. He fell to the ground in front of the huge goblin that was lying on the ground. His eyes glowed red with anger. He forcefully slapped Kang Ha-jun across the face with his fist. The impact sent him flying backward, landing on the asphalt. The goblin leapt at him, one leg outstretched. He landed on it, and Kang Ha-jun coughed up blood, the fatal end of the ogre's condition. Due to the fact that the basis of the ogre condition restricts blood flow to the brain, it is impossible to hold it for long periods of time. Normal people die in a few tens of seconds if they block the blood flow to the brain. Due to the fact that the ogre's condition does not completely stop the blood flow to the brain, it can last a little longer than 5 minutes, but in any case, it did not have much time. Remaining time, 1 minute. The car is coming down the road. A huge goblin looks at the car that is rapidly approaching him. The car slammed the goblin into the wall. Myung-hoon ran out of the car and asked Kang Ha-jun if he was okay. He was lying on the ground. Gritting his teeth, Myung-hoon noticed the explosion behind him. A huge goblin emerged from the fire. There were tears in his eyes. Kang Ha-jun, noticing the goblin's tears, asked if he was crying because the goblin with the flower had died. Gritting his teeth, he told him to stop blaming others. As he rose to his feet, he said that civilians and soldiers had died because of them. He asked why he was angry. Kang Ha-jun said he was angry. The veins on his face were swollen, his eyes were empty, and his mouth was bleeding. Remaining time, 7 seconds. The huge goblin charged, shouting in its own language. 5 seconds left. Kang Ha-jun charged while shouting. 4 seconds left. The goblin swung his fist. 3 seconds left. Kang Ha-jun swung the tonfa. 2 seconds left. Myung-hoon shouted something. 1 second left. Kang Ha-jun and the goblin are facing each other, swinging at each other. A huge goblin is lying on the ground with a huge hole in its torso. Kang Ha-jun is lying on the ground. Myung-hoon is sitting next to him. He said he was absolutely exhausted. Kang Ha-jun said with a smirk that he couldn't get up either. They are surrounded by goblins. Myung-hoon asked if they would die like this. Kang Ha-jun replied that they had done enough. Myung-hoon closed his eyes and said that people say that heroes die young. He said it wasn't a bad life. He heard a sound and his eyes widened. Looking around, he saw that the goblins around them were encased in ice. The voice praised Myung-hoon for doing a good job and told Kang Ha-jun that they haven't seen each other in a long time. The main character with a sword on his shoulder told them to leave everything to him and rest. A crowd of goblins were trapped in ice behind the main character. Salmon spreads his arms wide and shoots magic at the goblins. They're standing on the road, and Namgung said it looks like they've killed everyone, and compared to King Ghoul, it's very simple. Getting to his feet, Myung-hoon asked how they got here without a car. The main character pointed to the descent to the subway. Myung-hoon asked if they had left Sinchon Station. He said it should be full of goblins. Namgung replied that they had killed them all. Myung-hoon gave a thumbs up and said that he didn't expect anything less from him. Jeon Jong-in asked if they would go to his father's place now. The main character replied that this was the plan. Jeon Jong-in raised an eyebrow and asked if he had mentioned that they could buy an elixir in exchange for rewards from the dungeon. He said they don't have anywhere near 400,000 heads. Namgung replied that he never said they would be able to earn 400,000 heads in the dungeon. Jeon Jong-in was surprised. Salmon asked what reward he took from the dungeon. Namgung held up a book that was wrapped in a purple aura. The dialogue box says, Book of Balansar. Grade, Magic, Best. A book penned by the odd mage Balansar during his youth. Trade one item for another at random. Items can range in grade from normal to rare. The new item is independent of the original item's grade. The book is consumed upon use. Myung-hoon, after looking at the book, said that another item will be summoned if you put material into it. He asked the main character if he was interested in gambling. Salmon said that putting an item above normal rarity in the book would be a waste. Namgung held the necklace up over the book and said that this was the secret of the book. He said, feeding the book a rare item. The book slammed shut, grabbing the necklace inside of it. The dialogue box says, Book of Balansar has consumed a material. Checking the material's grade, rare. Balansar's prank has been activated. The book glowed with a bright purple light. The book turned white, glowing yellow. The dialogue box says, The Book of the Great Balansar. Grade, rare, highest. A reimagined version of the summoning book penned by Balansar, who attained sagehood in his youth. By offering one material, you can acquire a higher grade item of the same type. The potential item grades span from magic to epic. The summoned item's grade is one level higher than that of the material used. After the summoning book is reduced to ashes. Myung-hoon exclaimed about her giving the item a higher rarity. Namgung started talking about what kind of item they had that was extremely rare. He glanced at Myung-hoon, who was looking at him in surprise with a sword in his hand. Grabbing the sword with both hands, the protagonist inserted it into the book. He frowned. The dialogue box says, Sword of Penitentian. Grade, Epic, Highest. A sword newly forged by the executioner Tanian, made by melting down his own sword while repenting his life. The resentment has disappeared, but the blood has soaked even deeper into the blade and hardened. When blood touches the blade of the sword, it exerts a special power. Namgung held out his sword, shrouded in blood. He said that even though it's not a sword with an ego of its own, it seems to choose its master because it's epic rare. The dialogue box says, the sword is consuming the blood of its wielder. Mind energy is forming on the blade. There's a fixed probability of gaining control of a hunted monster. Myung-hoon said with a smile that it was the perfect weapon for Namgung. He said that he was using necromancy, but up to this point, he didn't have a proper weapon. The main character replied with a smile that it was all thanks to him. Myung-hoon said that the sword originally belonged to him anyway. Scratching the back of his head, he asked what weapon he should use now. Namgung handed him a white sword. Myung-hoon exclaimed in surprise that it was the sword that froze all the goblins. He added that he wanted to try it out. The main character said that Jeon Jong-in knew this was going to happen, so he chose him carefully. He added that he didn't take it just because of the name without any understanding of swordsmanship. Jeon Jong-in asked worriedly what about the 400,000 heads in the elixir. He thought that, just as he had thought, a second life was a delusion. The main character replied that there was no need to worry about it. He said that he killed all the goblins in Sinchon Station and earned the title of Goblin Ruler. The sword started to disappear in his hand. He said that, thanks to this, he got access to their storage. Namgung showed a bag of money and said that he took 550,000 heads from it. He added that it was more than enough to buy an elixir. Jeon Jong-in laughed nervously and said that he didn't expect anything less from him. The main character told Myung-hoon and Kang Ha-jin to go to the press conference once things were more or less settled down. Kang Ha-jin asked why so suddenly. Namgung said that with everything under control again, the reporters would gather here soon. He said that in order for everything to go according to his plan, the other prophets could not know his true identity. He said they had experienced a lot of battles and fatigue, so talking to reporters would be less exhausting than walking with them. He asked them to pretend to be prophets and give interviews. Myung-hoon gave him a thumbs up with a smile and exclaimed that he sent him to Sinchon first to make him look like a prophet. He said he didn't expect anything less from him. With a frown, Namgung thought that they were attracting attention, just as he had planned. He thought that everything was going better than he had planned. As he left, he waved his hand at them and told them that he was leaving it up to them. Myung-hoon and Kang Ha-jin watched him go with their hands to their heads and told him to leave the reporters to them. The main character, Saman and Jeon Jong-in entered the gloomy corridor of the hospital. Namgung said that something was wrong, because even if a few goblins were taken to the hospital, in the presence of the police and the army, there shouldn't be such chaos. Jeon Jong-in said that his father is in the intensive care unit and they need to hurry. The main character told him to lead. They ran down the hospital corridor. The main character turned to the side when he heard a cry for help. He broke away from the others and turned aside. At the end of the corridor, a girl was sitting on the floor. Hugging herself, she asked for help. The main character asked if she was okay and what had happened here. She replied that some suspicious people had appeared and made a mess of the hospital. She said they killed everyone and took their heads. A policeman lay dead on the floor, a grimace on his face. Looking at it, Namgung said that it wasn't goblins who did it, but humans. The girl said that it's people who can come back. She held out her hand apologetically and asked if he could help her up. The main character held out his hand to her in return and told her that she didn't need to apologize. She thanked him. Namgung jerked her up, tugging on her wrist. Saman and Jeon Jong-in run through the hospital. Saman turned around and asked if he had heard that. Jeon Jong-in said he didn't hear anything. She noticed that the main character wasn't with them and asked where he had gone. Jeon Jong-in said that this is his second life, and he most likely remembered something important and ran away in a hurry. He said they needed to check on his father's condition urgently. Saman thought about how she couldn't just abandon Jeon Jong-in because he was weaker than her. She agreed. The girl asked him what he was doing. She said it hurt and demanded to be released. On her finger was a gold ring with a spike. The main character asked about the fact that this is Shakun's needle. He said it wasn't as poisonous as the red hornet's venomous sting, but it was quite effective on humans. He said that the cause of the chaos in this hospital is quite obvious. The girl swung the knife in front of her, and Namgung jumped back. She said that she was able to deceive everyone and everyone else. She asked him how he understood. The main character replied that he understood thanks to the dexterity rune that he found in the dungeon. She asked about the fact that the runes were already starting to appear. The girl said that, according to the information they received, these are not simple items. With a small smile, she said it was for the best. She said that since he had been in the dungeons before, he should have other rewards and she could profit from it. The girl smiled ominously and said that she was a little sorry because he was her type. She said she would take them from his corpse. Namgung said that only his wife was his type and he didn't care about her at all. Frowning, she asked if he'd heard what she'd said. She threw herself at him with a knife, smiled maliciously, and told him that he would not leave here alive. Namgung calmly took her wrist. Then he grabbed her wrist with his other hand. The protagonist calmly frowned. He threw it to her side. When she landed on her feet, she said with a smile that she thought he was something special. She asked if it would really be so boring. She added that she was slightly disappointed. The main character thought that he could easily deal with her, but he needs to think about his public image. He thought that even if he was a terrible person, nothing good would come of killing him yet. He added that it works if someone is watching him. A red sword appeared in his hand. The girl clutched her knife and shouted in surprise that it wasn't something you could just buy even if you killed a bunch of goblins. Namgung ran ahead and said that since it was just the two of them, he would kill her without worrying about anything else. He told her not to worry because he would make it as painless as possible. He swung his sword. The knife above the girl's head was cut in half. Her eyes widened in surprise. In a world where the apocalypse is happening, Chase Song-ah was like a newborn lion cub with a natural talent for becoming the king of beasts. A wild beast waiting for its time. A newborn lion cub, like any other mammal, is full of curiosity, especially because it is a predator with a developed intelligence. He feels an interest in new things and mocking them as if testing his strength. However, the moment he encountered this, an emotion that was much stronger than curiosity took hold of him. This is fear. In front of the trembling lion cub was a huge dinosaur, an unbridled feeling that drowns out even the instincts of a wild beast, a force that cannot be defined by the words strength or might, something that fits right into the definition of a cheeky newborn lion cub. The dinosaur opened its mouth wide, making a loud sound. Absolute power that comes from the supernatural. The girl turned around in fright, thinking that he would cut her even if she blocked the blow. She thought that she would die if she didn't dodge, and her body moves on its own to survive. She leaped forward. She thought the man was a tyrant. She tearfully glanced at Namgung, who was standing there with a sinister face. He looked like a giant dinosaur to her. Looking at his blank eyes, she thought that he had completely lost his mind. The girl gritted her teeth in fright and thought that she had contacted the wrong person. When she saw the sword coming, she squeezed her eyes shut and thought she was going to die. Salmon called out to the main character. His sword stopped. His eyes widened in surprise. Salmon was peeking around the corner. The main character turned to her. Jian Zhong and said with a smile that his father was fine, but they didn't have the elixir. He started saying that he should go with them as soon as possible. Seeing Namgung standing with a sword in front of Ki Song-ah, who had fallen to the ground, Salmon asked what he was doing. The main character recalled a conversation with an elderly man with a mustache. They are sitting in the woods, illuminated by the firelight. The man held up his index finger and told him that if he ever went back in time, he would never kill people for nothing. He said that by killing people, he makes enemies. The man pointed at him with his index finger and said that if higher beings want to see a hell in the world where people kill each other, he should stand up to them. He said that Godslayer Namgung might be a cruel Godslayer, but he wasn't a killer. Namgung thought that he almost killed a man in front of his daughter. He thought Clark might be right. The main character replied that this woman was trying to steal the heads, so he decided to scare her a little. Salmon said she understood. Jian Zhong thought that he didn't think he would stop at scaring her. Namgung told the girl not to do anything like that next time and stay away from him. He asked her if she understood. Startled, she said she understood. There was a noticeable blue mark on her leg. She thought about how her ankle had only been broken by the power of his sword. Jian Zhong urged them to go to his father's house as soon as possible. Namgung agreed and said he would be back soon. He asked the girl her name. She replied that her name was Ki Song-ah. Leaving, the main character said that he would remember. The sign says, ICU. They are standing near the hospital bed where Jian Zhong's father is lying. Jian Zhong told him that he brought Namgung. Namgung greeted him and said it was a pleasure to meet him. He introduced himself. The main character removed the mask from Jian Tiho's face. He poured the elixir into the man's mouth. The elixir was red in color. Jian Tiho slowly opened his eyes. England Disaster Response and Control Center. The girl asked Alec if he had seen the video online. He replied that he had seen it while looking out of the window. He said that if it was real, then there were two incredible people in Korea. The bald, dark-skinned man folded his arms and said that the soldier's name was Kang Ha-jun and his skills were very good. The girl asked if he had seen the weapon he was using. She said that choosing a weapon based on information alone is quite risky. She said that the other guy's sword is most likely something that isn't in the giant's pockets. Alec replied that the subjects were said to be different for each prophet and region. The girl, spreading her hands, said that this is at least a rare item and this is nonsense. A sword appeared in Alec's hand and he said that he could be a prophet like him. He said that in this case, there is a high chance that the prophet is the guy next to Kang Hajun and not himself. Looking at his reflection on the sword, he said that if he was a prophet like him, then it made sense why he used a special weapon. He said that if they want to meet him, they need to meet Kang Hajun. The girl said that the world's public attention is focused on Korea, and this is not what they planned. Frowning, Alec turned and said he knew. He said that attention should always be on them and on him, because only he can be the savior. She put her hands on her belt and asked him what he was going to do with them. Alec replied that he would try to hire them, since it was better to get them on his side before they got on the other prophet's side. Frowning, she asked what he would do if they refused. Alec closed his eyes calmly. He opened his eyes with a sinister smile and said that they would have to cut the sprouts. Salmon opened her mouth in surprise. The multi-story building was destroyed and shrouded in flames. Myung-hoon exclaimed that he never thought that after they dealt with the time of dusk, they would come back and see something like this happen to the main character's house. He asked them if they thought the goblins had done it. Looking at the way one yaksha scolds the other and he bows apologetically, Nambyung said that it seems that the yaksha landed in the wrong coordinates. Salmon climbed onto Yaksha's back, grabbing him by the hair. Myung-hoon said that, apart from cure, it seems that all the yaksha of the country have come, and unfortunately to the main character's house. Nambyung said that everything was fine, and he prepared a shelter in case something like this happened. Myung-hoon asked when he managed to prepare the shelter, and if he prepared it because of the apocalypse. Salmon walks behind them, thinking that she hasn't slept at all and has been walking all night. Nambyung said he prepared it in case North Korean soldiers attacked. Myung-hoon replied that he had prepared well. In the ground under the heavy iron door, there was a drop down. Salmon, looking around with displeasure, asked if they should live here. Myung-hoon said that at least they have food and other supplies. The main character, taking out a red ball, said that there are several shortcomings in modern architecture when it comes to survival in the apocalypse. He said that if they reinforced the building with the items Jork gave him, it would be a safer and more livable place. The dialogue box says, Goblin Stronghold Crystal, a crystal ball that creates a cave-like dwelling. By increasing the rank, the dwelling can be expanded. The ball in the protagonist's hand split in two and began to glow with a bright blue light. The dialogue box says, Goblin Stronghold, Level 1's core is activating. Blue energy enveloped the room, turning the shelves into wooden ones, creating a tree stump with a candle in the middle. In front of them was a wooden structure with 4 stumps. The ceiling crumbled slightly. The dialogue box says, the Goblin Stronghold construction has been completed. Expansion is available upon raising the rank. Salmon looked up, her face contorted with displeasure. Nambyung said it was temporary. He said that if he develops Stronghold, it will turn into a shelter that can protect them. He thought about how he had never seen it in his previous life. With a nervous grin, Myung-hoon said that he was cool. Salmon queried when they would move out of here. Looking at the phone, the protagonist assumed that Alex should have already contacted Kang Ha-jun. On the screen of his phone was written, Group, 8 Martial Stars. Ninagawa Iri, Den Howell, Roxane, Mikhail, Alec Trauman, Era Michelle. Nambyung said he needed to start his plan soon. A plane is flying in the sky. Alec and his team are sitting on the plane. The phone rang. Picking up the phone, Alec noticed that an unknown number was ringing. The girl asked if it was Kang Ha-jun. Alec waved her to silence. The voice on the phone told him that Pathfinder of the Fog's prophet has their eye on him. He told him to be careful. Alec frowned and exclaimed in surprise. He looked at his phone in surprise. He thought about Pathfinder of the Fog. He thought that according to the information of his higher being, his ability should be Providence. Alec thought it was an ability that a person could use to see into the future. He thought it was too strong an ability, but he probably couldn't use it to its full potential yet. Alec thought that if the words from this call were true, Pathfinder's prophet already knew that he was heading to Korea right now. He called out to Johanna. She responded, leaning her face on her hand. He asked her to move her meeting time with Kang Ha-jun a little. Grinning, he said that he needed to change the future. Namgung, phone in hand, said that Alec could try to torture his brain for ideas as much as he wanted. He said it was already in the palm of his hand anyway. Myung-hoon looked out of the bunker and asked who he was calling. He said that Alec had asked to change the time and place of the meeting 3 hours later at Uedo, 63 Square. The main character said that he told him about being watched by Ninagawa Erika. Myung-hoon asked if he had contacted her too. Turning around, Namgung replied that there was nothing in this life that connected them, but the most important thing was to make Alec believe that she was here. He said Alec was quiet and didn't trust people. He explained that he was just taking advantage of his mental weaknesses and digging deeper into them. Namgung added that he plans to force Erika to come here. He said that once she saw the future they had created, she would want to come here at all costs. Namgung said that he would make his move first and told Myung-hoon to proceed according to plan. Myung-hoon swallowed nervously. He asked what would happen if the three prophets gathered in Korea. The main character replied that nothing would happen and they would be the ones protecting Korea in their stead, starting with the second gate of hell. Someone asked Alec what they would do until then. They walked through the airport with their bags. He replied that they would look around at 63 square meters and get ready. The bald, dark-skinned guy said he was hungry and asked if they could have a snack first. He added that everything gets better on a full stomach. Johanna asked him where he learned that expression. Hansen replied that he had lived in Korea before, and that was an old Korean saying. Alex said there was a high chance of a fight, so a snack was a good idea. He suggested going to a Michelin-rated steakhouse. He added that he wasn't sure if there was one in Korea. Hansen argued that once abroad, you need to experience the local food culture firsthand. Standing by the taxi, he waved and told them to follow him because he knew a place. Johanna exhaled and told him to focus on the mission instead of stuffing his stomach. She asked me what you could eat in such a small country. She added that they had passed through the gates of hell, so everything must be broken. They found themselves in front of a battered sign. Johanna said she knew it. Hansen replied that the place was just 40 years old. They're sitting at a table. Alec turned to Johanna and told her to eat slowly because no one would take her food away from her. Hansen said he now knows how to eat delicious food. Alec looked at the kimchi on his fork, raised an eyebrow, and said he didn't like it. Johanna, with sparkling eyes, said that it seems Koreans eat kimchi every day. She told him to quickly eat a spoonful of galbai soup and eat kimchi with radishes. She forcefully began shoving kimchi into Alec's mouth, grabbing his head. Hansen said with a smile that he had already fallen in love with Korean food. He suggested that they take a longer look around since they still had time before meeting Kang Ha-jun. Johanna agreed and told him to lead them. Johanna stands in front of a mirror in a clothing store, dressed in traditional Korean clothing. Behind her, Hansen gives her a thumbs up. They eat meat in a restaurant. A man with a sword and a red apron puts a plate on their table. Johanna is photographed with them, sitting on the lawn, showing 2 fingers. Evening, they walk down the city street. She said it was fun today. Johanna said that Korea is just amazing and they have passed through the gates of hell, but their cities still function as normal cities. She said it was something that couldn't be explained by the existence of a prophet. Alec noticed that, unlike her rough nature, she was rather soft today. He asked her if she liked the country that much. Confused, Johanna hurried forward and said that it was almost time and they had to go to the meeting place. Hansen laughed, and Alec agreed. The sun is setting over the city. A girl in traditional Japanese clothing looks out the window. She asked Namgung, who is standing behind, if he is the regressor that her higher being, the Pathfinder of the Fog, mentioned. She looked at him calmly. The main character looked at her with a serious face, and she called him by name. Alec walks down the hall, looking out the window. He said that it was impossible to get ambushed at this altitude, and it was impossible for third parties to interfere. He said that Myung-hoon couldn't fool him. Through the headset in his ear, he was told that they could be tapped. The voice said that he might be being watched right now, so they would hang up and wait at the designated place. Alec agreed and took the device out of his ear. Someone called out to him from behind, and he turned around. Kang Ha-jun walked up to him and introduced himself. Alec held out his hand and told him that he looked bigger than in the video. He thanked him for coming despite the changes in their meeting. Kang Ha-jun ignored his hand as he walked past him and said it wasn't a problem. Alec wondered if he knew about his skill, Moon Vision. This is a skill that lets you know how much power your opponent has. He thought that if he knew about this skill, he would definitely know about the others, and perhaps that he had used the Eye of the Sun to find and hire Johanna and Hansen. He turned to watch him go and thought that if he really knew about Johanna and Hansen's existence, then he too might be hiding something nearby. Alec thought that this was just a guess, and he had to maintain a competitive demeanor. Putting his hands in his pockets, he said he was surprised that Korea had successfully defended its lands when even England, with a prophet like him, had suffered great damage. Turning to him, he said that it was all thanks to them. He asked about how they were the ones who killed the magical creatures in Shincheon. Kang Ha-jun responded that he was flattered and said it was thanks to the quick actions of the police and army as well as the townspeople who came to the rescue. Alec replied that he didn't need to be so humble, and he came here to talk to a skilled person like him. Kang Ha-jun replied that he then suggested that he talk to another person. He jerked his thumb back and added that he also got his weapon from him. The elevator arrived at the 60th floor. The doors opened and Myung-hoon stood behind them. Alec grinned, thinking that this was exactly what he'd expected. He held out his hand and introduced himself. Myung-hoon laughed, scratched the back of his head, and introduced himself, saying that he was retired now, but he used to be in the same squad as Kang Ha-jun. Alec thought about how he was also avoiding shaking hands with him, and it looked like he was prepared. He decided that now he could be sure that his powers were known to them. Alec said with a smile that since he was a soldier, it wasn't surprising that his movements were incredible. He added that he is very different from a regular actor like him. Myung-hoon replied with a smile that if a global star like Alec hadn't spread the news about the prophets on the news, then the prophets wouldn't have come to the surface. Alec asked if that meant he was a prophet himself. Myung-hoon replied that he couldn't tell him everything yet because he wasn't sure if he was an ally or an enemy. Alec grinned and, after a moment's silence, agreed. He said that doubts are an important factor for a leader. Myung-hoon replied with a smile that, as expected, only wise words came out of his mouth. He said he thought he would understand being so generous. He said calmly, the smile fading from his face, Catholic St. Mary's Hospital, Noryeongjin Station. Myung-hoon said he believes he knows how to choose the best seats. Alec's eyes widened in surprise. He thought about how he knew that Hansen and Johanna were waiting for him, and even if he was a Pathfinder's prophet, his powers must be incomplete. He scowled and shouted that the world was under threat, and a prophet like him should know that. Alec clenched his fist and said that they needed to join forces, and he needed to see it if he had the powers of a prophet. He shouted that the effectiveness of modern firearms will soon come to an end, and they need to lead humanity with them. Alec shouted that they, the prophets, were the only ones who could save the world, and so he was going to create an international union. He shouted that he had only come here to ask him to join him and introduce him to his comrades. Alec stood with his arms outstretched, breathing hard. Kang Hajin looked at him silently. Myung-hoon asked if this was true. He said he felt like he just wanted to play hero, not save humanity. Alec laughed nervously and asked what he was talking about. Myung-hoon said that he says this in beautiful words, but in reality he just wants to take over the world by creating an alliance that will control all states. Alec raised an eyebrow nervously and asked if he could sense his intentions. Myung-hoon asked what if he could. A sword appeared in Alec's hand. Kang Hajin called out Myung-hoon tensely. He leaped forward, pushing it out of the path of the dark, brilliant energy flow. The flow of energy cut Myung-hoon's cheek, who was clenching his teeth tensely. Alec said with a grim face that this was why the powers of foresight were so unpleasant. He said that he really didn't want him to turn out to be exactly the prophet of foresight out of all seven. He approached them, shrouded in a dark aura, and said that if he spared his life, then he would just become an obstacle to his goal. Myung-hoon got to his feet. Alec, with a dislike on his face, wrapped in a blue aura, told Myung-hoon to die here. For the whole night, Nambyung told Erica that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. She returned the favor and said that it looked like they knew each other in his previous life. He asked her if she liked the future he had planned. Erica said nothing. Nambyung said that Alec Traman and Myung-hoon are dating, and Myung-hoon is pretending to be the Pathfinder prophet. He said that Alec would want Myung-hoon to die, or to be more precise, Pathfinder of the Fog's prophet. Nambyung said that if Alec found out that Pathfinder of the Fog's prophet was actually Erica and not Myung-hoon, he would come to her and try to kill her. He said that this is why she has no choice but to ally with a man named Nambyung before Alec arrives, because he is a regressor and knows the future without the powers of providence. He asked if she came to Korea after thinking about it. Erica said yes. The main character said that she would have to play by his rules, but she put aside her pride and came. He said she was wise. Erica agreed and said she didn't remember the future like him, but she could look at it for a moment. Nambyung held up his phone, which showed a call from Myung-hoon. Alec's voice from the phone says she's going to kill Pathfinder of the Fog's prophet. The main character asked if the future was like this. Myung-hoon asked Erica if she had heard. He said quietly into his jacket that, as expected, Alec was going to kill her. Alec looked at him in surprise. A huge human silhouette appeared behind him. He swung a huge fist at him, and the blow knocked Alec out of the way. He used his sword to slow down and asked when he was in time. A huge man with a beard and a shaved head, wearing a red jacket and a t-shirt with an image of Erica, with a threatening face, said that there is nothing to recognize here. He said that the only thing he needed to know was that Erica's enemies must be killed. Turning around, Alec shouted at Myung-hoon that he had tricked him. Myung-hoon said with a grin that he had never told him that he had the ability of providence. He said he just threw the bait, and he fell for it. Alec furiously asked what he had said. The man punched him in the stomach and told him not to get distracted. Trembling, he crouched on the ground and thought about how an ordinary person would have died from this blow. He wondered who Erica was to control such a monster. Gritting his teeth, he thought about whether Myung-hoon really wasn't a prophet, or if they were tricking him by creating a fake person named Erica, or if they were really subordinate to Erica. The man looked at Alec, his eyes red with anger, and asked if he had just thought of Eric. Swinging his fist, he told him not to dare think about Eric. Nambyung said that Alec Traman had other intentions, and this is a desire that any person has, but very few can achieve it. He said that Alec Traman is special in this regard. He said that out of the 8 supreme beings, the observer of the sun and moon gives the most benefits to its prophet once the carnival begins, pretending to be a supreme being, full of humanity, to fulfill the purpose of human desire. However, what the observer of the sun and moon really wants is to see a monastery of people brimming with greed. and in order to satisfy his perverted taste, Alec Trauman was chosen. Erica asked Namgung if he could tell that he was different from Alec. She said that as far as he already knew, her power of foresight was still incomplete, and she needed affirmations from the distant future that she couldn't predict. Erica said she needed a guarantee that he wouldn't betray her and that he wouldn't end the human race. The main character replied that this was a stupid question. Wrapped in a dark red energy, he said that she was actually wondering what would happen if she didn't follow the regressor. Alec glanced at the approaching fist. Crouching low, he shouted that he didn't know who Erica was. He gripped the sword tightly, shrouded in energy. Alec swung his sword in front of him. The man dodged, and a stream of energy sliced through the concrete pillar behind him. Alec said it was pretty fast for a human. The man replied that he was a natural killer, and he could not be compared to an actor who makes everything look fake. Alec asked if he thought his actions were acting. The man raised an eyebrow. Alec was behind him very quickly and said that, in that case, he was sorry. Putting his face down, he said that he didn't learn his moves in Hollywood, but in SLS. He frowned seriously, shrouded in a blue aura. Alec thrust his sword forward, shrouded in energy. Myung-hoon and Kang Ha-jin thought of it as an assassin squad that was disbanded a few years ago. Kang Ha-jin raised an eyebrow and told Myung-hoon that they should help Igor. Myung-hoon asked where he had been looking all this time. He told him to look at Igor. He asked if he could see his fighting spirit. Igor dodged Alec's sword swing. Turning around, Igor asked for help with a frightened face. Myung-hoon said with a smile that he just told them not to get in the way. He said it was a fight between two men and they should let Igor enjoy it. Kang Ha-jin replied that he understood. Myung-hoon said that he is a tough guy and will go down in history as the man who defeated the prophet with his bare hands. Igor cursed angrily and shouted that he needed help. They awkwardly agreed, and weapons appeared in their hands. Alec swore and swung his sword. With a swing of his sword, he sent forth a stream of energy and told them all to die. Igor gritted his teeth in fright. Myung-hoon blocked the flow of energy with his sword, but it sliced through the tonfa in Kang Ha-jin's hands and knocked Igor back. A cloud of dust rose behind them. Adjusting his shirt collar, Alec said that Myung-hoon managed to block Galaxy Sword, and the sword he saw online was different. He said that it was impossible for him to buy equipment on par with the sword that his higher being had given him. He asked if it was Eric or his higher being who had given him the sword. Myung-hoon paused, frowning. Alec said that since he wasn't going to answer, he had no choice. He said that one is enough for questioning and told Myung-hoon to die. Myung-hoon thought about how it can't control this sword because he made a contract with Namgung and he just borrowed it to pretend to be a prophet. Red veins covered his body, and while looking at the sword, he asked if he would shout again. Myung-hoon, wrapped in a red aura, turned to the comrade who used to be a decapitation sword. Alec stared at the swirl of red energy in surprise, not understanding what it was. He frowned. Myung-hoon swung his sword and shot red energy at him. Alec sliced through it, swinging his sword in front of him. Kang Ha-jin appeared in front of his face, swinging a tonfa. He hit him with gritted teeth. Frowning, Kang Ha-jin said that SLS is nothing like that. Alec caught his tonfa in his hand and said that he expected nothing less from an active employee. Frowning, he asked if he could fight 3 SLS opponents. Kang Ha-jin asked in surprise about the 3. Johanna appeared behind him, her face serious. She punched him in the back of the head. Hansen slapped Myung-hoon across the face. They fell to the floor. Hansen said they'd better retreat. He said that their escape route was ready and offered to go. Alec said they had to finish the job before they went. He said he needed to chop off their heads and give them to whoever planned this. Hansen said he knew a big guy. He said he worked for a Russian assassin organization called Zakat. He said whoever planned this, whoever it was, would be much stronger than him if he served them, and if they killed him, they might provoke them. Alec frowned and asked if he wanted to tell him that he should be afraid. Hansen started saying that wasn't the case. A hand gripped the back of his neck. Johanna was surprised to say that she had definitely hit him in the C3 vertebrae. She asked him how he got up. Myung-hoon started laughing while lying on the floor. He said with a smile that it was nothing to Kang Ha-jin because he was an ogre. Kang Ha-jin was clutching Hansen's neck with a threatening face. Johanna asked in surprise about the ogre. She asked if that meant it had a hidden endowment. Myung-hoon grinned and said that he was just like that from birth, the best of mammals, a human superior to humans. Kang Ha-jin Hansen aside. Johanna, who saw him throw Hansen into the wall, thought about how he was concentrating the blood flow in his muscles. Frowning, she said that he was really strong. A whip appeared in her hands. The dialogue box says, Tale of the Nine-Tailed Fox. Grade, Magic, Best. A whip made of the tail of the nine-tailed fox. She lashed out with her whip and shouted that she had the advantage when it came to fighting techniques. Kang Ha-jin blocked her punch with his hands. He grabbed her whip and started pulling on it. Johanna's eyes widened in surprise. Kang Ha-jin slapped her across the face. She fell to the ground. Kang Ha-jin noticed in surprise that there was no impact. Johanna appeared behind him with an evil look. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Myung-hoon realized in surprise that she dodged Kang Ha-jun's punch in 1 second. Gritting her teeth, Johanna continued to choke him. Myung-hoon said that SLS doesn't just mean that they have a better fighting sense. He said that she saw all the weaknesses of the ogre and used a chokehold to instantly stop the flow of blood. As he got to his feet, he asked how Alec had been able to hire someone so talented. He said he had to do something. Alec told Johanna to hold it and that he would cut it in half. He swung his sword in front of him. Myung-hoon appeared in front of him and blocked his sword attack. Alec furiously asked how he got up and if he was going to talk nonsense again. Myung-hoon chuckled and said, "Perseverance." His smile twinkled slightly. Alec swung his sword furiously and shouted at him to shut up. He shouted that he was disgusted with him. Myung-hoon chuckled and said that he wasn't bad, but it wouldn't be enough to break his perseverance. Swinging his sword furiously, Alec shouted at him to stop talking. Myung-hoon blocked his attacks one after another. Looking at his shaking hands, Myung-hoon thought that he had only exchanged a couple of punches with the prophet, and his hands were already shaking so badly. Alec said with a sneer that all he did was block like a coward. He asked where his perseverance had gone. Myung-hoon thought about how he couldn't resonate with sword spirits 100% without Nambyung spirit magic. He thought that it was already a miracle that he could get this far with someone else's sword. Frowning, he thought that even though it was unpleasant, he couldn't win against Alec. He thought about how he could only extend the time until the moment Nambyung had mentioned. They crossed swords, and Alec shouted at him to accept his fate and let go of his desire to live. They were interrupted by a cry for help. They turned toward the voice. Kang Ha-jun slammed Johanna, who was hanging on his back, against the wall. Closing her eyes, she thought that this monster would kill them all if she let go. She asked someone to come to her aid. Kang Ha-jun got to his feet. Alec and Myung-hoon looked in their direction in fright. Johanna fell to the floor. Hansen caught her in his arms and told her that she had done a great job. Myung-hoon asked him how he was resurrected. Hansen grinned and said that his body was well trained, so it wouldn't break easily. He thought about how he was in a lot of pain and was just bluffing. Myung-hoon replied that he was surprised, but he was stronger. A steel glove appeared on Hansen's hand and he said that his Korean was even worse than his own. He said it was because he was concentrating everything in the force and he should have left some for a brain like his. He held out his fist, orange energy glowing from the muzzle. He told him to use high-tech like him. The dialogue box says, "Boom Blaster. Grade, Magic, Best." A gauntlet created for attack soldiers to use by the magic engineering country, Alcester Republic. There was an explosion behind Alec. Myung-hoon called out to Kang Ha-jun. Alec waved his sword and asked how dare he forget about it. Myung-hoon looks towards the energy. Blood drips from Alec's sword to the floor. Hansen and Johanna are standing behind him, and he says it's over. On the floor in front of them are Myung-hoon and Kang Ha-jun. Alec told them to behead the 2 Koreans and take the Russian bandit away for questioning. Alec told Hansen that he wouldn't kill the Zakek guy right away, just like he said. He asked if he was happy with it. Hansen agreed. Johanna cursed and said that she thought her back would break in half. She took the whip in her hands with a threatening look and asked to be allowed to kill Kang Ha-jun. She said she would rip his back in 2. Myung-hoon told them to go to hell. Alec raised an eyebrow. A blue light illuminated the room and the floor began to shake. Alec asked what was going on. He whirled around in surprise. He frowned. Lizard-like monsters were falling from the sky. A huge blue eye opened in the sky and monsters were falling out of it. The second gate of hell opened. Alec swore.